What is up, everybody? John the Morgal here doing a video response to yet another flat earth debunking video. And really, I want to give quick credit, or at least credit for inspiration. I just watched a video from Flat Earth Asshole. It's called Flat Earth Asshole versus Koi Fresco. And I thought it was pretty funny, pretty well done. And almost made me want to do a debunking of the same video, but I felt like that would be a little bit repetitive. So instead, I just sort of randomly picked the first flat earth debunking video that was relatively short. And I just kind of poked around a little bit in it. I didn't watch the whole thing, so I don't know what I'm up against in terms of their proofs. Maybe they'll prove the globe and kick Flat Earth's ass, in this one. The video that I'm going to be sort of video responsing here is called Proving the Earth is Not Flat, Part 1 of the Horizon by VoysovReason. And they've got it all misspelled. It's VoysovReason, Reason, sorry. So they've got Voice of Reason all misspelled, so I'm wondering if that is supposed to intend that their reasoning is scrambled. Because that's the only way that I can imagine a person can actually study flat Earth and scrutinize the globe Earth, is if their reasoning is scrambled or if their logic is flawed. So without further ado, I'll just go ahead and roll the video and just sort of interject as I see fit. So I hope you enjoy, and I'll try to keep this quick. The original video here that I'm responding to is about 15 minutes long, so knowing me, this video should wind up to be about 45 minutes or an hour, because I am a bit verbose. Sorry. At any rate, I hope that you enjoy, and I'll go ahead right now and call fair use on this, as I am using this video material from Voice of Reason, and I'll put a link in the description for that, as well as the video I mentioned earlier from Flat Earth Asshole. And anyway, I reserve my right for fair use, as this is a scientific discussion in order to study the subject matter and converse about and even parody the subject matter at hand, discuss this topic in a different light than was painted in the documentary here that we're going to sort of dissect and argue against. So again, I do reserve my right to fair use of this material, whether or not it's copyrighted. And this is a very popular video. It was published on June 11th of 2016, so we're talking less than 6 months, and it's already got just shy of 250,000 views, so it's done very, very well. And the channel here, the Voice of Reason, only has about 6,000 subscribers, so I would say that's pretty darn viral video for a smaller channel. So without further ado, we'll just go ahead and get right into it, and I'll interrupt this guy as I see fit, since this is my channel, and I hope you enjoy. Cheers.
The Earth is not flat. We live on a spinning globe. It's amazing to me that I actually have to say those words in 2016. But there are a number of scientifically confused people that have convinced themselves and are trying to convince others that we live on a stationary, flat plane.
Okay, and if I'll just go ahead and jump in right there. You open your video with a pretty major claim that everyone's heard probably 5 billion times in their lives. And of course that claim is that the Earth is not flat, it's a spinning sphere, as if you're going out on some sort of a limb and you're very surprised that you're having to say this in 2016. And that says a lot about you, because yeah, this is definitely a surprising thing. However, I will intend to prove that you have not rationally scrutinized the spherical global spinning Earth model skeptically or scientifically. Your opening statement also claims that there are scientifically confused people, uh, which is very ironic, but scientifically confused people who think the Earth is flat, and that they have convinced themselves and are trying to convince others that it's not a spinning ball, but it's flat. For starters, we're all very familiar with what you believe to be proofs of a spinning sphere Earth. We're very familiar with the claims. We've heard them all of our lives. And so I highly doubt that you're going to tell me anything new about what you believe proves the sphericity of the Earth. I'm sure that whatever you're going to claim and whatever arguments you're going to use are not going to prove a spherical Earth. Now, I did scan through this video before I decided to make this response, and it appears to me that you only deal with curvature, and unfortunately another huge part of this spherical Earth equation is Earth spin, or axial rotation, which would be an extremely easy thing to prove were it indeed a reality. However, all physical experimentation not only does indeed show the Earth to lack all curvature, but in fact it shows the world to be stationary, and such physical tests range from actually firing projectiles vertically, as well as a little bit more advanced tests. For example, Airy's failure, which involves using the starlight and the estimated speed of light to show whether the Earth is in motion or the starlight or the ether is in motion. And of course, this was prior to Einstein's theory of relativity and space-time, which does away with the ether and puts space as sort of an infinite vacuum, or space and time meshed together as some sort of infinite vacuum, but that's a topic for another discussion. I just wanted to mention that I personally am not scientifically confused. I'm very well versed in the heliocentric model and the alleged proofs that go along with it, and I think that one of the biggest things to get out of the way first is that flat Earth is not what you think it is. In fact, the universe is probably a better place to start in describing reality as opposed to the shape of the Earth, because your entire understanding of what the universe is totally fallacious. You, as a spherical globe earther, believe that everything, all of the hypothetical galaxies and stars and everything was created from a hypothetical, theoretical Big Bang coincidence theory where everything came from nothing, essentially, or all of the matter and energy was compressed into some small area the size of a golf ball or a pea, or maybe even smaller than that. But of course, this is what you believe. You believe that you live stuck to the side of a spinning sphere that is essentially the result of a giant explosion. So you're essentially orbiting a piece of shrapnel that's orbiting a piece of shrapnel from some ancient 15 billion year old explosion, which there is no evidence for. There is no evidence for such things as orbital mechanics. It's all theoretical. It has been shown, indeed, that orbital mechanics are a physical impossibility. If you take the time to actually study this topic, you'll realize that you've been duped at every level when it comes to anything spherical Earth. So just wanted to make sure that we're off to a right start. Your claim I will intend to debunk, which is, again, your claim being the Earth is round and spinning when it is in fact a stationary plane. I will also show how your arguments, any argument that you can possibly try to muster to prove a spinning spheroidal Earth, will fail, because a faulty theory can never be proven to be true, while the truth can easily be shown to be true. And indeed, the truth will always be self-evident to someone who has an open mind. Now, by the way, here's the kicker. the very spinning globe picture that you were rolling during your introductory statement is a debunked animation. It is supposedly a 24 or very close, at least a day, maybe an hour or two shy of a day, maybe 27 hours, I can't remember, but it's about a day's worth of so-called Earth rotation from space. And what you'll notice, if you'd studied this at all, this was actually one of the first things that I stumbled upon when I was looking into flat Earth, or really static plane truth theory, over a year and a half ago, was the very animation that you're opening your argument with. You'll notice that during this 24-hour period, none of the clouds seem to be malleable whatsoever, and instead all of the clouds appear to be fixed to their relative positions and relative to one another, whereas we all know that over a 24-hour period, weather patterns change dramatically. And we know this from Doppler-based systems, which are ground-based systems. A lot of people think that the weather that you see on the Weather Channel is from satellites, but no, they've always used Doppler radar for that. And indeed, Doppler radar is a series of ground-based, tower-based, and I would say Nikola Tesla-based technologies, which have been used since the 40s. However, it's been shown in many videos, but NASA is merely a front, and the other national space agencies are a front to the fact that we can harvest free energy from the Earth itself. Nikola Tesla knew this, and that's why he was ultimately blackballed and died penniless, as the result of people like J.P. Morgan, Edison, and of course the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds, but that's a whole nother story. The point is that weather is not a static thing. The weather and the clouds above the Earth do not stay in one place for 24 hours ever. That simply doesn't happen. And the very video that you're rolling shows clearly that over a full day period, that the clouds don't change at all. They don't mutate, they don't morph, they're not malleable, and you and everyone else were fooled by an animation. I mean, honestly, do you believe everything you see on TV? Does that mean Jabba the Hutt actually is up there somewhere because you saw that on TV? Just because information is coming from a government agency, and yes, NASA is a government agency, doesn't necessarily mean that it is absolute truth. And in fact, to be a true scientific-minded person, or to follow the scientific method, which you claim flat earthers are incompetent in this realm, however, it is you who is incompetent in this realm. Because science is supposed to be the pursuit of truth through testing hypotheses, not making wild assumptions to fit your theorem, and ignoring facts, physical evidence, repeatable experiments, and basic observations, which are 100% contrary to your bizarre worldview, to your bizarre theory. Now, you think that living stuck to the side of a spinning sphere in the void of space is a normal thing because that's what you've been told your entire life. Just like you believe Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny was a real thing when you were a child. That's exactly how real the globe Earth is. Yet, you make this very presumptuous claim, blanketing millions or at least hundreds of thousands of people as science-denying idiots, when in fact the only one in this conversation who is denying science is the one who is refusing to follow the scientific method. So I would urge you to skeptically analyze the globe Earth model as a rational adult, much as you would the Santa Claus or Easter Bunny phenomenon as a rational adult. Because again, these are lies that well, your parents told you about the Easter Bunny or the Tooth Fairy or whatever, knowingly. Of course, your teacher is not lying to you about what he or she thinks the Earth is, because everyone thinks the Earth is a spinning globe. We've been conditioned to believe this since the very beginning of our education. It is designed that way. It is designed so that the obvious, plain, simple truth that the ground that you're standing on has never moved a single inch, these bizarre theories that are tattooed into our minds at very young ages make this plain, obvious, simple truth seem to be a bizarre conspiracy theory, when in fact you are simply incapable of seeing the truth because of the filters which have been implanted into your subconscious for your entire life. And again, this doesn't just start and end with flat Earth. This starts with the universe, which is actually, the stars and the universe, what's up in the night sky. All of that is merely a secondary feature to the dominant, prevalent, unrivaled in the cosmos, if you want to call it that, stationary plane Earth. We're not on some disk flying around in the infinite universe. The infinite universe doesn't exist. That's a figment of your imagination, and just as gravity is, as a warping of space-time, a figment of your imagination. Now, I will say for the record that I'm not arguing what goes up must come down. However, I'm arguing that what goes up must come down is a law of nature, and gravity is a theory to explain this natural law, only assuming the Earth is a spinning sphere in outer space, which is one of the most bizarre, just outlandish theories if you actually think about it and not just believe what you've been told your entire life. And yet, you will label me someone who is an incompetent scientist, or let me pull up my notes and see exactly what your words were. Scientifically confused, which again I would submit that is exactly what you are. You believe in science as a religion. It's called scientism. You believe anything that comes from the mouthpiece of theoretical astrophysics, which is by definition pseudoscience because it cannot be tested, it cannot be demonstrated or falsified. So you believe in pseudoscience, which is actually science fiction. Most of our worldview is based on the imaginings of people like Hubble, who imagined in 1929 that there were other galaxies in the universe. So, with all this in mind, I'll let you get back on with your video, but I just wanted to really contend the points that you made within the first 10 seconds of your video. And I can honestly probably just stop it right here and just urge you to actually research this, but we'll continue on with this and I'll try to make my responses a bit less lengthy. Just as a side note, the video that I've been playing in the background is a time lapse of a local weather pattern over the course of about 12 hours. And again, what you were showing is some antiquated NASA animation of what's obviously a model of the Earth spinning around with exactly zero relative motion in any of the clouds in a time-lapse animation that spans about 24 hours. So that has been proven to be a forgery, and the first person that I honestly noticed or who had pointed this out to me was Matt Powerland, who claims to have worked as a subcontractor for NASA. So at any rate, get back to the your short 15-minute video there.
There are a number of reasons for this resurgence of a long extinct belief system, including literal interpretations of the Bible, scientific illiteracy, cherry picking and other errors in reasoning, and a general distrust of government leading to imagined conspiracy theories.
Okay, so you just went through a few quick points one by one, and I'll go ahead and just sort of counter those before you get into them, so that hopefully I won't have to interject very much. But every one of those things that you listed, I found, rather ironic, rather typical. But it was literal interpretations of the Bible, cherry picking, scientific illiteracy, other errors in reasoning, and distrust in government. So these are your sort of, this is what you think is sort of a witch's brew, which makes a flat earther, when in fact it's just simple observation and testing of theories, which turns people into, it's not flat earth believers, it's realizing the truth. I think that's what you fail to understand. But the first point, literal interpretations of the Bible. Now, you're absolutely wrong about this. I can 100% guarantee you that the vast majority of those who have abandoned the heliocentric model have done so from a strictly scientific or even secular viewpoint, and not because we read the Bible and decided to take it literally. This claim is beyond absurd for myriad reasons. For one, billions of people have read the Bible billions of times, and none of them walked away from it a flat earther, right? In fact, most Christians abandoned their faith because of the doctrines of the hypothetical physics, which are mutually exclusive to the fixed and immovable earth mentioned scores of times in the Bible. Secondly, evangelical Christians, meaning people who claim to literally, take the Bible literally, will get extremely upset when Christians claim that the Bible teaches a flat, stationary earth. Most Christians actually feel flat earth is an embarrassment to Christianity, so you're 100% wrong that this isn't then some sort of evangelical Christian movement. One point that cannot be overlooked is the fact that the religion of science, aka scientism, has ridiculed Christianity for centuries, claiming that the Bible is complete nonsense, because it obviously differs with the outlandish theories spewed forth from theoretical physics, and therefore the Judeo-Christian religion, amongst other religions, such as Vedic cosmology and others, are merely primitive babble of uneducated goat herders thousands of years ago who didn't really understand much of anything. The fact that the world is rather easily proven to be a stationary plane shows that such arguments from globeheads down through the ages are null and void, and indeed the realization of flat earth often steers self-proclaimed stubborn atheist warriors towards revisiting the Bible as it is in fact technically correct about the shape and nature of the world being a stationary plane. And it was ironically the religion of scientism which was operating in full-blown error since the Copernican revolution, and probably long before then, to that all that theoretical madness about the spherical earth and the mediocrity principle, or whatever you want to call it. I would imagine that you are not a Christian, the dude that made this original video, but some people do claim to believe the Bible to be the Word of God. And I have faith in God, but I'm not exactly a fan of the empirical structured religions with their golden chalices and an accepted New Testament, which is so riddled with mistranslations and poor translations. I've found myself, personally, with just cursory research, dissecting several English Bible verses in the original Hebrew to find the true intent of the gospel being the complete contrary to what is expressed in the King James Version. This is besides the point, but I've never been a religious person per se, and what made me into a flat earth realist was the simple fact of re-examining the assumptions which we've all been trained to assume as gospel in terms of an accepted astronomy and cosmology. But to the point, if Christians believe the Bible is the Word of God, then technically they should all be flat earth proponents, but that's not the case. That is why Christians interpret the Bible literally, as proof of this truth, this sort of biblical evidence is only applicable to Christians, as atheists are obviously not going to take anything from the Bible very seriously, and honestly, neither do evangelical Christians, who adhere to the side of a spinning sphere in the vacuum of space, of course. The final point is about this whole religious thing that you mentioned, is the revelation of flat Earth reality to the world is a worldwide, culture-wide phenomenon which I believe affects a wide cross-section of people, and is certainly not exclusive to Christians by any stretch of the imagination. The reason this awakening is occurring is because people have been introduced to the concept that there are other models which explain observable reality better than the heliocentric model. There are physical experiments that we can repeat to show the world lacks all curvature and axial rotation. Now, I'll touch on this on another one of your points, but NASA has been caught lying to the world and stealing our money. You might not believe this, but it has been conclusively proven that NASA has been faking pretty much everything since day one, when they allowed Nazi scientists to kick off NASA, which was indeed a rocket project on the surface or as a facade, but in reality it was a psychological operation or a psyop designed to imprison our minds and steal our wealth in order to control us and belittle our personal outlook on the world by manipulating the lens through which we view reality collectively. The second thing you mentioned was cherry picking arguments. This is such an ironic claim coming from a Glober, as there is no cherry picking necessary. And I'll stick with two very simple arguments which should be extremely easy for you or any Glober to prove conclusively without any questions about it. The first one being the inversed or expected inversed square vertical descent in all directions away from an observer due to curvature on relatively smooth areas of the Earth's surface, like the salt flats, or similar vertical curvature observed from anywhere, amidst standing water at the exponential rate of 0.666 or 2/3 of a foot per mile squared. The second point that you must prove, and yes, the burden of proof is indeed on the Globers, as these claims have been shown as fallacious, but number two would be axial rotation of the Earth as a whole, not to mention speeds exceeding 1,000 miles an hour near the equator. And of course, as a result of this alleged eastward spinning at the equator along a curve, you must also show evidence that an observer there is vertically falling along that curve at over 135 miles per hour, again at the equator. Now, hopefully you will at least prove these two theories in your video, as the heliocentric model falls apart if one or both or all such elements are shown to be imagined, fallacious, and based on nothing more than circumstantial evidence and assumption. Incidentally, geometry literally translates or etymologically means measure the earth. The definition of physics is literally the study of bodies in motion. So a spinning sphere should have two basic demonstrable attributes, being again inverse square curvature and axial rotation, which should be very easy to fundamentally prove using geometry and physics. How ironic is that? Now, I don't see this as cherry picking, but rather testing the assumptions which are the cornerstone of yours and the majority of people's belief system. You must show solid, concrete, repeatable evidence demonstrating how the world drops away from any observer exponentially in all directions, and that such an observer would be zipping east over 1,000 miles an hour at the equator, vertically dropping along that curve at over 130 miles per hour compared to a tangent line from the base point. Now, it's been shown that the necessary curvature and axial rotation you believe in does not actually exist, and this is proven through physical experimentation, And I would invite and urge you to watch my recent documentary series called The Globe is Dead for an in-depth look at many, many disproofs of the heliocentric model, or my previous documentary series called Earth Not a Globe. I'll put links in the description for each series playlist. There's a lot of great information in there that I would urge any globe Earth proponent to consider. And I would submit that in light of all of this evidence, the burden of proof is indeed on you, or is on the Globe Earth team, to show evidence for just these two simple attributes for starters, which again are necessary in the model that you believe in. Furthermore, you must refute all of the evidence which proves Earth curvature and Earth spin are imaginary, theoretical, and are simply not supported by anything other than theory and assumption. Now, the third topic you mentioned, which is the most ironic of all, is scientific illiteracy. I'm going to interpret your accusation of scientific illiteracy as non-believer in scientism, or a heretic to your extremely bizarre religion of sun worship, error, and ignorance. Ironically, the people you're calling scientifically illiterate are actually participating in the scientific method, which involves making unbiased observations, forming theories to explain these observations, and conducting experiments to test or determine whether reality aligns with or disagrees with said given theory. On the other hand, a person who refuses to consider the truth, which must necessarily be supported by repeatable, obvious, tangible evidence, ignored because it doesn't align with your religion, and renders you scientifically impotent. The sad truth is, the Globe Earth model is not a model of science, but is more like an illogical, fictional monster, a Frankenstein of theory founded upon assumptions, stitched together with egotism, all of which is heavily affected by philosophical preference, i.e. the Copernican principle, which insists, as a law, that we must never assume to hold any special or central place in the so-called universe. Let's call it the Frankenglobe. This is a monster created by mad theoretical physicists who have all been heavily influenced by the culture of the day, which laces all of our science fiction with science and repetitive reinforcement of infinite space and planets and space travel and aliens, which is all summarily fictional. Assumption and theory patched together with dogmatic belief systems while ignoring obvious physical evidence is a fairly decent definition of scientific illiteracy, or complete impotence for that matter, and I would say that that applies directly to you and those who hold your position. I can assure you that if you actually apply the scientific method to test the static plane Earth, or the globe spinning Earth, you'll be astonished to learn that our home could not possibly be any sort of spinning sphere, regardless of whether or not it is theoretically possible. Something may be theoretically possible and still not be the truth. The Frankenglobe is theoretically impossible by all accounts, proven by countless hundreds of examples, and I will not attempt to address them in this refutation, but I will again invite you to follow along some of my previous videos or documentary series or thousands of other content creators, and at the end of the day, to do your own research, but do so scientifically, which means, if nothing else, taking an impartial, balanced look at the heliocentric model, or Frankenglobe, in imagination verse theory, and compare that apples to apples with the truth, with the truth being the Earth is a stationary plane. The next thing you mentioned, other errors in reasoning, that is sort of a broad stroke, so I did sort of want to leave that alone because it is such a broad stroke, and I haven't heard your arguments yet, but just to give you a few examples of how your reasoning is flawed, by default as a glober are: 1. You believe the upper atmosphere exists adjacent to a near-perfect vacuum. This is, of course, physically impossible according to all laws of fluid dynamics. You must have an extremely sturdy structure separating a vacuum from a volume of gas in reality in order for the vacuum and the volume of gas to remain separate. and so this is a huge flaw in your logic. Gravity, which I'm sure you're going to use to explain this bizarre factor I just mentioned, but gravity is a theory to explain what goes up must come down. The fact that what goes up must come down is not proof of gravity, and in fact gravity is only necessary if you assume the Earth is a spinning sphere, which it isn't. Now, Neil deGrasse Tyson will drop his microphone to prove gravity, but of course this is merely a demonstration of the law, what goes up must come down.
What is gravity?
I have no idea. Okay, next question.
Wow.
This is called gravity.
Neil, I gotta say, you're totally blowing my mind right now.
That's what I do. I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson, bitch.
Instead of gravity, an object's point of rest is determined ultimately by density and buoyancy, along with temperature and other factors like surface area to mass ratio, but certainly not gravity. The world itself possesses a static electric charge and is, for all intents and purposes, a giant capacitor plate with a massive magnetic vortex in the north, presumably the center of the map, or the center of the known universe. Since the laws of density and buoyancy rely on a tendency for high-density objects to fall, globers believe this proves gravity. Now, unfortunately, a static electric charge, as held by the Earth itself, is always attractive, regardless the polarity or conductivity of the object it's attracting. Besides, we have thousands of pounds of air pushing down upon us at sea level. It's about 14.7 pounds per square inch. You've obviously never skeptically analyzed the theory of gravity, as it has been debunked by so many different facts. It's difficult to name them all. And in fact, I've got another playlist on my channel called The Fallacy of Gravity. It's got several videos on there, and I'll put a link to that in the description, just so I don't have to go through all of these points over and over again. For all intents and purposes, the world being a giant capacitor plate was first postulated, I believe, by Nikola Tesla, and I agree with this. I think there's good evidence to support this. Now, I'm not insinuating that the world is a disk in space. I don't believe, or I know for a fact, that space, as you think of it, doesn't exist. I'm not insinuating that the world is a disk in space, but instead the world is housed within the physical plane, which may extend to infinity, or it may end at any point up to and including infinity. At this point, it's simply unknown to the general public what lies beyond the outermost regions of the static plane Earth, which is why I believe the Antarctic Treaty is in place. I can assure you that the world's governments are well aware of what's beyond the known realm, as they've had a monopoly on it, or had a monopoly on the Antarctic covertly since the 1950s. And the Nazis were actually very interested in Antarctica during the 30s and the 40s. Not to get off the beaten path, but whatever the extent of the physical plane, our known world is essentially defined by the path of the sun. The sun is much closer than you've been told, and so known human history has all occurred someplace where the sun rises and sets. There may be other worlds housed upon the very same physical plane with their own so-called solar systems and universes visible in their night sky. However, this is mere speculation. In summary, your primary error in reasoning is your inability to see the obvious truth that is directly in front of you, has been directly underneath your feet your entire life, due to a lifetime of programming by people who believe the very same thing that you do, just as I once did as recently as about 2 years ago. You believe that there's no problem, going on to another example of your fallacious logic, or scientific illiteracy. You believe that there's no problem with the fact that we can see all of the same constellations year-round from somewhere on Earth, even though winter equatorial stars should be on the opposite end of the universe compared to summer equatorial stars. The fact that we can see all equatorial constellations year-round debunks the heliocentric model completely, Yet another major error in your logic or a failure to scrutinize your model properly. Another one is you believe it's no big deal to see a crescent moon in the middle of the night, when in fact the crescent moon and the new moon and the phases around there should always be on the day side of the Earth due to the setup of the alleged heliocentric model. The fact that we can see a crescent moon in the middle of the night or a full moon in broad daylight, not to mention the fact that we can see the North Pole star Polaris at the same point in the sky all night long, let alone all year long, this is incompatible with the heliocentric model. If you look at this objectively, we couldn't possibly see the North Pole star in the same position over the course of the night, let alone over the course of a year, without moving your telescope a single inch, if we're actually humoring and scrutinizing the heliocentric model objectively. You also believe that a flight from New York to LA is often identical in duration to the return flight, and that's not that big of a deal. This one single fact actually proves the world to be stationary, not spinning at all. Certainly not spinning 700 miles per hour east in the US. Taking off from New York heading west should be going against one hell of a headwind. However, the destination, Los Angeles, should also be racing towards the plane at about 700 miles an hour, while the plane chugs along at its about 500 miles an hour. And you should necessarily have to add these two speeds together because the two objects are racing towards one another. The plane and the destination should technically be, racing towards one another during such a westbound flight, which is about 2,500 miles from New York to LA. Now, on the other hand, the plane leaving LA heading east may retain some of its angular momentum lent to it by the hypothetically spinning Earth before takeoff. However, as the plane wastes energy ascending and banking, it would literally be racing against New York. The simple fact is the world is proven to be stationary due to this one simple fact of aviation, being the east and west flights are often identical in duration, and even further still, which is so very counterintuitive in your model, is the fact that eastbound flights are often faster than the westbound flights. So this is the exact contrary to what you would expect if everything was spinning eastward. There are many other aspects of aviation which disprove curvature and such. For example, horizontal gyros governing the artificial horizon do not need adjustment for curvature, which would necessarily occur were the Earth a sphere with the airplane traveling along a curve to maintain its altitude or to maintain its level. For example, horizontal gyros governing the artificial horizon just simply do not need readjustment because the Earth is flat. Planes obviously fly level, they don't fly curved, meaning their path, if the Earth was a sphere, a level flying plane, its path should be a tangent to the curve of the Earth, yet a level flying plane will maintain its altitude, yet again disproving the alleged, very elusive curvature of the Earth. I'm growing rather tired of pointing out errors in your logic, but a final point involves the disparity in centrifugal forces at the equator versus at the poles, assuming the world to be a spinning sphere. At the equator, you'd be spinning east over 1,000 miles an hour, vertically dropping along that curve compared to a tangent from the base point at 135 miles an hour. You would hypothetically be standing perpendicular to the axis of rotation, which is theoretically 4,000 miles underfoot. On the other hand, the same observer at the North Pole would be spinning 0.0 miles per hour, about half the speed as the hour hand on a 12-hour clock, atop of the axis, parallel to the axis with 0 vertical acceleration due to spin and 0 supersonic eastward velocity. This means that the expected centrifugal force at the equator would be infinitely greater than the expected centrifugal force at the pole. In truth, an observer will indeed weigh slightly more at the North Pole than an observer at the equator. However, this tiny flux in weight is aligned with the barometric pressure at the two locations, meaning it is atmospheric conditions which push down with slightly more force in the north compared to at the equator. If the world were actually spinning as claimed, the lack of centrifugal force at the poles would render an observer or some amount of mass as many thousands of times heavier at the pole due to the utter absence of centrifugal force found at the equator. You also mentioned distrust in government. Now, this may be true in many cases for flat earthers or conspiracy theorists in general, and I can't say I blame them, but my personal beef is with liars in general, government or otherwise. NASA has been lying along with all of the other international space agencies who coincidentally happen to be proud members of the Antarctic Treaty, hint hint, for some reason. All of the nations pretend to be enemies or frenemies, have all agreed for some reason that the one apparently untouched region of the world, rich in all sorts of natural resources and important scientific data, are practically off limits to the general public and ostensibly to corporations. Now, if you can possibly find it in your heart to temporarily suspend your unquestioning belief of everything NASA and other space agencies claim, just for argument's sake, and look at all of the hundreds of examples where NASA has been caught red-handed, totally busted, faking their asses off, faking spacewalks, faking ISS hangouts, faking the moon landings, faking the 1972 mission to Jupiter, which was Pioneer 10. I made a video about that as well. You can find it on my channel if you're interested. But NASA is lying. And incidentally, just one of those synchronicities, but the word NASA in Hebrew means to deceive. So look that up. NASA certainly adheres to esoteric occult symbology. Most of their missions and craft are named after some sort of occult or secondary meaning. I think one of the most recent ones they launched was Osiris Rex. And of course, Osiris is the Egyptian sun god, and Rex means king. So they literally named, and I believe this was the largest rocket ever to be launched ever, Osiris Rex. What that means is Egyptian king of the sun or the underworld or whatever it is. It's irrelevant, but the point is NASA blatantly advertises itself as an occult organization. Now, I don't just expect you to take my word for any of this. Go look at the evidence. There is an empirical mountain of evidence showing that NASA is not exploring space, but instead they are fooling the world and stealing our money. In exchange, we get cheap beef films of fake space, and of course we do get some inventions which are created by scientists on NASA's payroll on Earth, and yet even though we the taxpayers fund their research and development programs, NASA sells their technologies that are developed on Earth to the highest bidder corporations, where it is then resold back to the public to make profit off of investments that we made in the first place, when such profits should be a national benefit. But it's not, because the corporations obviously run the government. But that's a whole nother topic. So no, I don't necessarily distrust government, although they have been caught red-handed in all sorts of scandals and lies going back many presidents, many administrations in history. Hell, even the very first one, is rooted in lies. Did you know that there were 8 presidents prior to George Washington under the Articles of Confederation? This is off the beaten path a bit, but if a person doesn't trust known liars, can you blame them? If I lied to you once, would you trust me? Maybe. If I lied to you twice, would you still trust me? Probably not. What if I lied to you like 5 or 10,000 times? Would you believe a word that came out of my mouth? I suppose you actually would, but only if I worked for the government, because government officials are higher levels of beings and are impervious to lying. They can never lie, sort of like Superman, right? And then your final point there, that everyone couldn't be in on such a giant conspiracy. The shape and nature of the world are not a giant conspiracy, nor are they beholden to our theories. Our theories are crafted to explain nature, or our theories are crafted to explain natural phenomenon that we can observe. The accepted bizarre theories have been uncontested by nearly the whole world, sans the gullible toddlers who are forced into a heliocentric cosmology belief system as early in life as possible. The topic of heliocentrism is never revisited objectively, ever, and we're forced to adhere to the illogical, disproved assumptions that our world is a spinning sphere hauling ass around in a vacuum. And really, that's what I beg everyone to do, is just simply to revisit these topics that we learned in elementary school and never revisited. Just revisit these topics objectively and see how much sense they make to you. So, no, I don't think there are that many people in on the hoax or conspiracy, as you call it. Most people, such as yourself, you'd be a perfect example, perpetuate the fallacious model. You're not lying, it's what you believe. By nature, any government agency has a prime directive, number one directive for any government agency, which is to continue its existence as a government agency and expand its reaches, increase its power and funding, and ultimately expand the control it has over maintaining a specific mindset amongst the people. You are, unfortunately, a case in point at how well this mind control works. I mean, come on, you actually believe a pile of ridiculous theories and assumptions are reality, but simply refuse to reconsider the foundations of your worldview that was sort of constructed by people you've never heard of while you were a toddler during your formative years, just as occurred to your parents and just as occurred to your grandparents. Now, the word government literally means mind control. However, simple greed and bloated egos are plenty of motive to keep such lies coming from NASA, but only amongst a very few people at the top of the agency would need to be in the know. I mean, let's be realistic. If space doesn't exist, there really isn't much need for a space exploration agency, right? So the astronauts who claim to have been to space are obviously lying, and all of them, if not 99% of them, are Freemasons who are sworn to secrecy by their lodge. So the astronauts, I would say, are in on the lie, and there's only ever been just upwards of 500 people throughout history who claim to have been to space. So that doesn't amount to anything. I mean, there's millions of Freemasons and Satanists and people who really don't mind lying and really love getting paid, who would do this, and it would be very easy to profile and recruit people capable of doing this when you've got a $20 billion a year budget, plus some untold sum of private investments coming from private investors. Now, above the astronauts, there must be some hierarchy which produces their little freak show. But other than that, I would bet that the majority of NASA employees are just as oblivious as you. No offense. I was right there with you a year and a half, 2 years ago. Most people, such as yourself, find questioning the outlandish Big Bang heliocentric theory or testing alternative hypothesis as absurd. Ergo, it doesn't require very many people in the know to keep this ridiculous lie going, because everyone always believes it, and even though you can't prove it, you will defend the lie. That's how this works. So you're not lying, you're not in on the hoax, but you are indeed perpetuating the fallacy. You are living, breathing proof of this fact, and I hope that you understand what I mean. And again, no offense is intended here. It's just an observation that applies to nearly everyone in the world.
I don't for a second think that NASA, along with every other public and private space enterprise, and every other scientifically literate person in the entire world, are involved in a massive conspiracy to hide the truth from us. That's a claim that demands really strong evidence. But let's leave them out of it. I cannot prove to you that the images and videos from space are real, and you cannot prove that they are fake. But we don't need to believe them. We can prove the globe and the heliocentric model to ourselves without them.
I would beg to differ with you on just one small point, that point being the claim that we cannot disprove the images and animations from NASA, when indeed we can and have shown many examples over watching hundreds of hours of the so-called ISS lie feed, that they're faking this. There are tons of examples that I could cite, but I would just urge you to watch the GLOBEBUSTERS archives, because we've gone over this ad nauseum. One big example that I would cite, and maybe I can find an image for it, maybe not, but you can find this if you look for it, where the sun is supposed to be the only light source in the scenario, and the sun will be directly in front of the camera, ostensibly or imaginatively 90 million miles in front of you, and yet the ISS, or the lie SS, will be backlit, or it'll be lit from the opposite side as the sun. And what that shows is that they're obviously using local lighting sources and faking all this. Looking at this footage, the sun is way over there lighting everything up from the rear, but yet if you look at that portion of the ISS closest to us, there's lighting on this side. So how is the sun lighting up the back side of the ISS from way the hell over there? Look below, like down to the right, like all of the, like that white part off to the right, that's backlit. Not to mention the countless examples of air bubbles being spotted on official spacewalks, and this would be in Japanese spacewalks, Russian spacewalks, as well as US NASA spacewalks. So it becomes quite obvious that they're faking the spacewalks in a pool. And I would also invite you to check out one of Jeranism's more recent videos where he breaks down exactly how they're faking this. So anyway, I'll continue on, but your claim that you can't prove that they're real, yet we cannot prove that they're false, is wrong. I agree with you that you can't prove that they're real, but there's just so many examples of proof that NASA has been faking their footage that you're wrong about this. They have been proven liars.
Just as generations of people did long before NASA or anyone else went to space. In a series of short videos, I would like to teach you how you can prove to yourself with your own eyes and experimentation that we live on a spinning globe. Several things that we can see with our own eyes clearly demonstrate that the Earth is a globe, and cannot be adequately explained by the flat Earth model, no matter how you try to twist reality. These include the apparent movements of the sun, moon, planets, and stars, moon phases, lunar eclipses, time zones, and many others. But in this first video, I'm going to focus on just one thing: the horizon. The most important thing to understand is that the horizon is flat. That's right. From our vantage point, even from a high mountain or an airplane, the horizon is flat. Flat earthers, and also many globalists, for lack of a better term, seem to think that the horizon should look curved to us. That's flat wrong. And I think this is the single biggest reason there even is a flat Earth community. The biggest source of confusion. You are expecting to see a curve where there is none to be seen. You are looking for the wrong thing.
I would have to say that I wholeheartedly agree with you that you and everyone else is looking for a curve that cannot be seen, and I would submit that is because it does not exist. Your video is showing so far 300 feet in altitude and still no curve. However, even at over 100,000 feet in altitude, there is no curve, and even more importantly, the horizon line appears to maintain its level with the eye. So if the Earth was a sphere, proportionally with altitude, you would necessarily need to look lower and lower down in order to see the horizon. However, the horizon raises with you regardless of altitude. Now, unless you're talking about a fisheye lens in use, which is one of the tricks up NASA's sleeve, there is no curvature to be found at any level. And however, on the other hand, you globe earthers claim that ships will disappear over the curve of the Earth at 3 or 4 miles. So, how ridiculous is that? You say that there's no curvature to be seen, and yet one of your favorite pet proofs is the old observation of Christopher Columbus, where he says that the ship's mass disappearing below the horizon after the hole is proof of a spherical Earth, when in fact it's merely the operation of perspective as well as atmospheric refraction, which causes this phenomenon and not the curve of the Earth. I would submit that there are further experiments that you could do to prove that there is no curvature, but again, I agree with you that you're looking for curvature that isn't there, and I disagree with your assumption that that's because we're looking for the wrong thing, but instead, there is no curvature, and that is according to any architect or engineer responsible for building things which must practically work in reality. And when you're talking about long railways, canals, bridges, the curvature or spin of the Earth are never taken into account, which they necessarily should be if the Earth was a sphere. But in fact, the Earth is proven to be a plane because all builders, any major highway projects where there's long lengths involved, the 8 inches per mile squared or 2/3 foot per mile squared calculations are not taken into account by builders, architects, engineers, that sort of thing. So anyway, yeah, there is no curvature. Agreed.
To picture what I mean, look at this orange. If I take a thin slice of it, I get a round disc. The edges of it, where the knife cut through, is a flat circle. That is what you see when you look at the horizon, the edges of a circle. The edges don't curve side to side, they run straight across our view. And since we are always in the center of the circle, they don't curve down.
Okay, so let me get this straight. What you're saying now is that the Earth is flat? Is that what you're saying? So you have to cut a bit of that orange off to show how the horizon works on a spherical Earth. That's pretty impressive.
When you can see the horizon in all directions, it is the same distance away in all directions. So when you spin around, it looks exactly like a straight line and comes back around to join itself.
Your observation is fair enough, but what you fail to understand is that your observation is not exclusive proof of a spherical Earth. The horizon line would also work on a flat Earth. Now, I've often likened the horizon as an equidistant circle surrounding an observer, especially, say, if you're out to sea when there's no sort of topography or obstructions per se. The horizon, and, say you get 14 foot up on a mast, which I've personally done. The horizon indeed looks like a circle all around you, and that's not because of any curvature of the Earth, but instead it's the atmosphere itself reflecting back at you. There's only a certain distance that we can see upon the plane Earth due to the atmosphere itself becoming thick and reflective at a specific distance, and it does depend on some conditions such as particulates in the atmosphere, the temperature, the density of the atmosphere. So there are variables involved which will either increase or diminish the distance to your apparent horizon. However, the horizon line does indeed expand and extend out proportionally with altitude, and the atmosphere plays a huge role in this either way. Whether you're on the ground or whether you're out at sea or whether you're 100,000 feet in the air, looking through the lens of a weather balloon, the atmosphere plays a huge part in what we perceive as the horizon, but not the curve of the Earth, because, again, there is no curvature to this thing overall.
Think about that. If it were curved down, it would not come back around and join itself at the same level. Even from a high mountain or from an airliner, the horizon is flat, because the Earth is so big and we are so close to it. All we are ever going to see is a small, flat, round slice of the ball of the Earth.
You're merely making a claim that is not backed up by any sort of evidence or mathematics, and I can assure you that if the ground falling away from you, or say you're out at sea, the sea falling away from you at 8 inches per mile squared would be an extremely obvious curve. Especially when you're looking at objects or lighthouses or cityscapes that are upwards of 50 and 60 miles away, there should be something around a quarter to a third of a mile in vertical drop due to the inversed square curvature expected on a spherical Earth that does not exist. So your claim that we're too small to notice the curve is fallacious, especially when we have the ability to gain high altitudes. But again, one of the baller's favorite proofs is the fact that the ships sink beneath the horizon, which is again in line with the laws of perspective and atmospheric refraction. But the Earth is curved enough to allow for that, yet it's not curved enough to allow for a quarter mile in droppage over 50 or 60 miles to be visible at all. And in fact, you've got ex-members of the Navy who claim to have used line-of-sight laser guidance, at over 100 miles away out at sea. Okay, so the fact is that all practical tests that you can possibly try to use to show whether or not there is this inverse square curvature, which would be obvious to any observer on a sphere with the given proportions, simply does not exist, and you will never find evidence for it, even if you think that what you're looking at in terms of the horizon is exclusive proof of a sphere. It is indeed not exclusive proof of a sphere, and in fact shows the opposite. It shows the Earth to be a plane.
There's a handy website that will calculate the distance to the horizon for any viewing height, and it also tells you how much of an object will be hidden behind the horizon if it's past the horizon. The site is MEGA-debunk.org/curve. Let's look at an example. This is the view from the J.P. Morgan Chase Tower, the tallest building in Houston. The observation deck is 879 feet above the flat Texas landscape. According to the MEGA-Debunk site calculation, the horizon is about 36 miles away. So this is what the horizon looks like on a map, a circle with a 36-mile radius. As we zoom out, you can see what a small part of the Earth this is, under 1% of the Earth's diameter of 7,918 miles.
Okay, so what you're saying is that from the top of that tower you can see the horizon at 36 miles all around you. Now, you may be correct in terms of that distance being a small fraction of the Earth's surface, so in Earth or global terms it's not that big of a deal. However, in human terms, 6 foot tall average human terms, the amount of vertical curvature expected over 36 miles is immense. Now, I'm not sure if you've ever applied the curvature calculations to reality. I think you said they were at 500 feet in altitude, so we can subtract that out later, but we know that the horizon is supposed to be 36 miles away. Now, if you just do the simple calculation of 36 squared, so that's 1296, times 0.6666666 equals 863 feet in expected curvature over 36 miles. Now, if we divide that by 5280, being a mile, we get 0.16 miles in expected curvature over 36 miles. So I just don't understand how you can conclude that the horizon, which is at eye level from over 500 feet in altitude, has curved down, over 800 feet. That's ridiculous. You have no evidence for it. And in fact, the horizon has increased in terms of distance because you're higher up. The atmosphere itself, even at 500 feet up, you're looking 36 miles out to see the horizon. The atmosphere is the ultimate barrier to your vision. And again, I would say that if there were no atmosphere on the Earth, you would be able to see much, much further. But again, at a certain distance, the atmosphere reflects light back at you, and it looks like blue sky, or a simple reflection like a mirage.
And when we show it edge on, you can really see that it is just a small, flat, round slice of the large Earth.
If the Earth were a sphere, the horizon 36 miles away in this example would be 800 feet lower than the ground beneath you. Sadly, the horizon line does not drop proportionally with altitude, proving the world doesn't drop away exponentially due to expected curvature. In fact, the dogma of curvature doesn't align with observable reality.
But getting back to the orange, you might be thinking that the slice of the orange is not flat. It curves down in all directions from the center. Well, yes, that is true for the orange, and it's also true for the Earth. And you can clearly see that on the orange. But on the Earth, it is simply impossible to see, because the Earth is so tremendously big. If you are 6 feet tall, and you stand at the shore of the ocean, or on a flat desert plain, the horizon is about 3 miles away, and the change in vertical height of the surface is only 1.5 feet, spread evenly over the entire 3-mile distance. You just aren't going to be able to see that. It's way too subtle.
You've got your logic a bit screwed up here, because you're claiming that you've sort of got it right, that if you're 6 foot tall, that the horizon line is about 3.5 miles out. Now, if you're going to apply curvature calculations to this, that 3.5 miles is where the Earth would be, expected to begin curving downward at the rate of 8 inches per mile squared. So if you were to lie flat on your belly, then your horizon line would be closer to you, and you could start applying the curvature calculations at that point. Now, we're not talking 3 miles. If you're standing about 6 foot above the ground, looking across a body of water such as Lake Michigan from about 57 miles away, and it's really closer to 60, and so I think you can subtract out the 3.5 miles to where your line of sight would become a tangent to the curve of the Earth. And so we'll even just go ahead and call it 55 miles from the observer at Grand Mare State Park, looking at the Chicago skyline. But I believe it is actually 57 is the number that we should be using, but we'll go ahead and err on the side of caution, and we'll give the globe Earth some padding, and just assume that the number that we need to square is 55 miles to get the expected curvature. So we'll do 55 squared times 0.666 is 2,016 feet in expected curvature beyond that 3.5 mile point, which is, again, if you consider the Earth level up to that point, then your line of sight becomes a tangent to that curve. And so what that means is that the Chicago skyline should be 2,000 feet beneath the horizon. Now, none of the Chicago buildings are anywhere near 2,000 feet, so the very tip tops of those buildings should be well over 1,000 feet beneath the horizon line. The fact is that we should simply not be able to see the Chicago skyline from 50 to 60 miles away. Say it's 57 or 55, it's just simply, it would be impossible to see if the Earth were a sphere with the given proportions. That's not a claim, that's not conjecture, it's measurable. Now, of course, you do have the element of atmospheric refraction involved, but that does not account for this 1,000+ foot rays mirage, and the line of sight across the lake very obviously being across a plain and not being across a body of water that curves down over 2,000 feet beyond the 3.5 mile point, because the observer was just probably less than 6 feet above that water line.
As an illustration, this is a Google Earth picture of the New York City skyline from Caven Point, New Jersey, just over 3 miles away. The Earth does indeed curve down away from the viewer in this picture, but it is just about 1.5 feet spread over 3 miles, so it is just too slight to see.
Again, this is merely a vulgar display of ignorance on your part, because you obviously don't understand how to apply the curvature calculations to the hypothetically spherical Earth. Again, if you're standing, say, 6 feet above sea level, and it looks like they may have been elevated even further than that, but say you're 6 feet above the level of the water, the Earth would apparently be level with your line of sight up to the 3.5 mile mark. That's where your line of sight would converge with the horizon, and therefore your line of sight, being the apparent level, would begin to diverge from the true level, which is the hypothetical curve of the Earth, at an exponential rate starting at about 3.5 miles. So your claim that you would see any vertical dropping away over 3 miles is just totally wrong. And in fact, it seemed as if whoever was shooting that image was elevated several feet above the water and then standing up. So it looked like they were more along the lines of 12 feet or so above the water, maybe 10 to 12 feet above the water. So their apparent horizon would be increased to closer to maybe 4.5 or 5 miles, not 3.5 miles at 6 feet, maybe even a little bit further than that. But the point is that either you honestly don't get this, or you're being disingenuous, because the images that I rolled previously were shots of, again, the Chicago skyline from about 60 miles away, subtracting out the 6-foot tall observer, and even giving the globe Earth some padding. We went ahead and squared the distance of 55 miles. We're not talking about 3 miles, we're talking about 55 miles beyond the 3.5 mile mark, where the line of sight would again, or should again, become a tangent to the curve of the Earth, but it doesn't. So, I either would say shame on you for being a liar, or shame on you for not doing your research, because you're misrepresenting your own model. You're misrepresenting how the curvature calculations should be applied to test the theory of, rotundity.
The Statue of Liberty is in the picture, and it's 305 feet tall, and only 1.2 miles away. And look how small it looks.
What you talking about, Lou?
The Statue of Liberty is in the picture, and it's 305 feet tall, and only 1.2 miles away. And look how small it looks.
Yeah, I'm going to have to concur with Arnold on this one and ask you, what the hell are you talking about? I don't understand where you're going with this, Willis. So you're looking at the Statue of Liberty, which is like a mile and a half away, and you're saying, look how small it is. So you're, observing the laws of perspective and how optics work and how the human eye works. The further away something gets, the smaller it appears, but from an elevation of what appears to be about 10 to 12 feet, we'll say 10, a 1.2 mile object shouldn't even begin to apparently curve. I'm not sure why you're focused on, distances of 1 to 3 miles and looking for curvature, when even standing at 6 feet tall, the expected curvature or vertical descent shouldn't even begin to occur until after the 3.5 mile mark. That's what you're totally failing to see, and I'm really not sure where you're going with all this very local observation of tall buildings. For some reason, you're avoiding the extremely distant observation of tall buildings and lighthouses, which show that the Earth does not possess the necessary inverse square curvature to result in an overall sphere. So, what you talking about, Willis?
But if the horizon is flat, how does it prove around Earth, you might ask? It's what happens when objects are past the horizon that reveals the curve. Sailors, for many centuries, have noticed that ships sailing away from you in the distance disappear bottom first and sail last.
Now, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to point out how disingenuous this series of images that you're showing, because you can't even really call it a video because it's cut like 4 or 5 times to try and prove that this boat is going over the curve of the Earth. But you can clearly see in this first sort of still frame that I took from the beginning of the video clip, you can see the mountains behind the ship. But in the very next clip, those mountains way off in the distance have simply disappeared. And what that tells me is that whoever shot this lowered their camera to insinuate or show false evidence that the ship has gone over this curve. So again, you see the mountains right in the beginning, and then in the very next clip, the mountains have disappeared, which means that the observer has changed their position. They've lowered their camera, and they've used a little bit of trick photography to make the horizon in the same place that it was in the previous images. It's very easy to do. So this is extremely disingenuous, and I would say that for even this second part, they've lowered their camera yet again. But you can sort of see the atmospheric refraction taking place where the ship is. There's sort of a reflection of the sail itself, which I'll actually roll a clip of my good friend Jeranism's. He did a very good, well-explained debunking and explanation of what's occurring here. Although my main beef with this video is the fact that you can see the mountain ranges in the distance in the beginning, and the mountain ranges disappear, meaning this is it's a fraudulent video. Now, finally, what I want to point out real quick before I roll these other clips is this I'll make a still image here where you can see that the bottom portion of this is a reflection of the sail above. And this is part of the illusion that causes ships to appear to go behind the curve. Is what's actually occurring is that thick, dense atmosphere right above sea level is sort of creating like a mirage. I don't know if you've ever driven down a long, hot highway in the desert or something, and you'll see in the dips and the bumps of the highway, you'll sort of see wavy reflections of heat is what it looks like, but under certain conditions, it'll actually reflect looking like sky back at you. Now, what's happening here is again, you've got a mirror image, and I'll draw a line right where the mirror image starts so that you can see that the ship isn't going over a curve, it's obeying the laws of perspective, and the bottom portion of the ship is being masked by the reflective nature of the atmosphere close to sea level at that distance. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll a couple of clips that refute your argument that boats appearing to go over the curve of the Earth is proof of a spherical Earth. Now, the couple of videos that you played were a bit disingenuous because they didn't show the entire path of the ship allegedly going over the horizon, and what they've used in that particular example is trick photography. Now, this phenomenon does indeed occur, where a ship traveling away from you will appear to merge with the horizon, hull first and mast last. And there's a few reasons for this, and it is understandable why people would think that it's because the ship's going over the curve of the Earth. But in fact, what you have are the natural operations of perspective coupled with atmospheric refraction. And in terms of the laws of perspective, I'm going to roll a clip from the audiobook that I did of Zetetic Astronomy that was written in 1865, because they do a really good job of explaining how, the typical understanding of perspective where all parallel lines meet at the same point, if you're going in Art Class 101, which is true to a degree. However, parallel lines that are nearer your line of sight will converge at that point closer to you than parallel lines which are further askew from your line of sight. So again, I'll let Dr. Robotham in Zetetic Astronomy explain this a little bit in more detail, because it's easy to understand once you get it, but it's hard to explain. So just one way that I can explain it, and hopefully you'll understand it with my simple explanation, but again, I'll roll a couple clips to make it clear. If you're, say, standing in the salt flats in an extremely flat area, and let's say you have a row of 30-foot telephone poles all running in a parallel line. Now what's going to happen is the more distant the telephone poles get from your point of view, of course they're going to appear smaller and smaller and smaller. But if you actually study this, what happens is the portion of the telephone pole which is nearest your line of sight, so of course that's going to be the portion that's closest to the ground, is going to converge with the horizon line at a closer point than the tip tops of those telephone poles. So what's going to happen is the telephone poles are going to appear to get shorter bottom first, and that's not because of any curve, it's just because of how the laws of perspective work, where again the parallel line of the tip tops of those telephone poles is 30 feet askewed from your line of sight, and so therefore they will disappear or merge with the horizon along the same datum line as the bottoms of the telephone poles. However, they will converge with that same datum line more distant from the observer. And so you do get this effect of sort of shortening at the bottoms more rapidly than shortening at the tops. And that's sort of a bad way to describe it. So again, I'll run a clip from Zetetic that explains it very well, using some really well documented observations and experiments to prove this point. Now, the other thing that you have going on, especially out at sea, but really anywhere that there's atmosphere, but the sea, you know, obviously you're going to have a more dense atmosphere in the sea than you are out in the desert somewhere. So atmospheric refraction is going to have a higher impact at sea than it would at the desert. Now, furthermore, when you're out at sea, you have the undulation of the water itself, which you could have, you know, a 6-foot swell that's, say, 50 feet from you totally cover up a 100-foot tall building that's 3 miles away. So the sea is not really a great place to do this. However, if it's a still day, you can clearly show, without using trick photography, that when a ship disappears under the curve, if you zoom in on it, it is indeed restored with a telescope or a good, you know, Nikon camera with ultra zoom or whatever the crap you want to call it. But this is very true. And the fact that you're using two sort of cherry-picked clips that are spliced together where they're obviously lowering the camera at intervals to sort of prove their point, and there could be, you know, swells of the ocean involved as well, it's not a good example, and standing water would be much better to use. But again, back to the atmospheric refraction close to the sea level at a distance, what happens is you begin to see the reflection of the ship itself. You sort of see a mirror image because of atmospheric refraction, and in some cases, if you zoom in on such a ship, it'll appear to be floating, you know, on air and not touching the water at all. And this is, of course, because of sort of a mirage or a trick of the eye where the atmosphere is reflecting a mirror image of the bottom of the boat back up or back towards you. So all of this is sort of hard to explain, but the ships over the horizon claim to a spherical Earth has been debunked, and in fact, I'll intend to show with these couple of clips that better explain this phenomenon than I, how ships would go over or would appear to go over a curve even upon a plane, which the Earth indeed is a plane. And again, the reason for this is perspective, the laws of perspective, and atmospheric refraction at sea. So really quick before I get into these next couple of clips, I just want to mention, first of all, a big thanks and shout out to Jeranism, my good friend and colleague. I'm sure he won't mind me using a clip of his. And the point of doing something like this is if something has been explained very well, or if a claim has been debunked, or if, you know, an idea has been expressed adequately, there's no sense in trying to, you know, recreate the wheel and repeat things. And sometimes it's easier just to you know, put in a little clip of something without having to waste my time and anyone's time redoing something that's already been well explained. So hopefully this will explain to you 100% why ships going over the alleged curve is an optical illusion. Like I said, if an idea has been expressed or proven conclusively, whether it was a video that Jaron made a couple months ago, or whether it was in a book written 150 years ago, you know, science often stands on the shoulders of people who have come before us and have done the due diligence and research and proven things conclusively, that so that we don't have to, like I said, reinvent the wheel and redo everything. Now, I'm not saying, you know, don't do your own experiments and don't verify things for yourself, but what I guess I'm saying is, you know, our time is so precious that sometimes it isn't necessary to reiterate something that's been explained well or proved conclusively. So enjoy the next couple of clips.
All right, and here we go. Now, the question we aim to answer is, does this boat ever go over the curvature of the Earth? It does completely seem like an easy answer, a no-brainer, and I'm sure many of you have seen this video before, and so that's what you're thinking right now. Well, pretty soon you'll see it as a no-curver. And as I said in my video, Boats Prove No Curvature, there is no curvature of the Earth, and therefore boats go over no such thing. So just keep your eyes peeled. There'll be plenty of things I need to point out to you to pay attention to, and by the end, in a mere 15 minutes, you will no longer believe that boats go over any such curvature. So we've got another little boat coming along here, scootin' dootin', and we're going to pause it here in a second, and I'll show you why. If you look carefully, this is the line of the water. Now, the reason for that is if you zoom in, you can clearly see that these are all reflections. They are not any different part of the boat. This is a reflected image off the waterline, which is a little bit past the waterline that we can see. It is a mirage effect, also a mirroring effect, and we'll show more of that as time goes on. But you can see that clearly that is the line at the bottom of the boat. It is definitely a reflected image, as you can see here. You can even see the waves in the water slightly past the water line. So now we look up at the boat again and see it taking off. And if you kind of look carefully here, you can already start to see the same thing is happening. You can see the water in front of the boat in between where the water line is and the actual boat. We'll try and zoom in here the best we can, and you should be able to see that that is clearly not the decor or the paint job of the boat. Sorry, let's scoot over here a little bit. There we go. And again, you can see the reflection of the waterline. Look at the, call that a red circle right in the middle there, and you can see right through the center of it is the waterline. I put a superimposed copy of the boat next to it so you could see that that is not the boat's direction, or sorry, that's not the boat's decoration. And the blue little waves over there tells you where the water is. So let's continue. Now if you look at it, it kind of makes sense. You can see that red dot, and you can see the water is right up to the center of that red dot. You can see the waviness of it. Okay, now here, again, you might look at that and say, well, what happened to the red dot? And that is what is being miraged or mirrored by the water here. In fact, at the very front of the boat, you might see the white section towards the front bottom left there, and you may think that's the boat. It isn't the boat, it's actually a reflection of the sail. And if you were to look closely here, you can see that the entire boat is reflected in the water again, and the blue squiggly lines are an example of the water. So this is what is actually happening when we see boats supposedly go over the curvature. Now again, it is easy to understand why the ancients would have thought that that's what was happening. But in today's day and age, there's no more excuses. Now here I put a little arrow, and if you watch carefully, right at that line, you will see clearly the waves of water as they run by the boat, and you can see the reflection of the left sail in the water. That's not the boat, that is a reflection. Just like in this image here of the sunset, that is not the sun melting into the water, that is the actual water. Kind of reminds you of this image here, this gentleman walking on a mirage street, and obviously the bottom of his body has been eaten up. And that is what's happening on the ocean when we look at boats. The bottom of the boat has been eaten up. Here you can look underneath that right sail. There's nothing there, whereas the actual boat, which I superimposed, had different sections of the boat there.
At this point, it looks like only the sail is visible. Kick ass.
Yeah, Red. Kick ass. See, if you really were all about science, you'd conduct non-biased tests, not ones with a clear motive to prove current known facts. See, I'm challenging those facts, and well, I just knocked one of them off its perch. Now you can see here what most people would have taken as the entire sail of the boat, that the boat had gone over the curvature, but again, there is no boat behind any curve. You can see that little notch there would be the bottom of the sail. It is reflecting, and that's all you're seeing is the reflection of the sail on the water and the sail itself, and the boat is masked right behind that little divot. It's camouflaged. Again, the blue waves are water. Let's keep going. So you can watch that little notch, and if you kind of keep your eye on it, you can see how it starts to blend. And now we've got what people think is a sail, but that's not the sail of the boat. That is the sail and its reflection. Again, if you aren't convinced by this, hold on tight, it gets better. So now we fast forward a little bit further. And to anybody, this would look like, clearly, the boat is on the other side of the curvature. So that's what you would think. But then we'll zoom in over here at this boat, racing in, and what do you see? Do you see the waves in the wake that this boat is kicking up? It's kicking up waves that are not part of the water that we can see. It's part of the backwater, the camouflage water. Look carefully, and you can clearly see that it is riding in the area that is being camouflaged and is being reflected off the sailboat. It is not riding in the water. It's riding in the actual water, but the water that's behind that hard edge. The water line is about here, and again, the curvy lines, blue lines, are the water. So let's continue on. So far, we've got no boat behind any curvature. It just doesn't happen. Again, you can see that boat riding on the invisible water. It's not riding on the water that it looks like to us. So now I added some gamma so that we could get a better view of what we were looking at. And I'll have you watch carefully because things get interesting. And keep your eye on the screen here. And as we super zoom in, we can actually watch where the water line is. And how do we know that? Well, look at the reflection behind it. We can see that that item is reflecting off that water line, which means the sails are a reflection and the boat is simply camouflaged or hidden behind that. Nothing is behind any curvature of any earth at all. Again, it does get better. We're going to start seeing lots of birds, and the birds are going to be the key to knowing where that water line is. Here comes a bird here. I drew the water line for you, and you'll see the reflection of the bird as he goes into the water. Start to keep an eye on these birds. You're going to see them left and right. Here comes another one. Did you see that one? Leaving on the right-hand side. Rewind it if you need to. And that is the water line. So again, there is no boat behind any curvature. There's a lot more water that we can't see. And that boat, which looks like a sail, is not a sail at all. That's simply a sail and then its own reflection. Again, the boat at this point is plenty far away. It is hard to see. It is becoming distorted, and just like the first video we watched that showed us what happened to that bay as the day got warmer. I'll draw the water line again here. Keep an eye on it, and you saw the bird take off from the water. And that's why you see a reflection, just like the reflection of the sail. Now here we're going to see the boat driving by this green thing. Obviously the red line is the water line, and you see the top and bottom of the reflection, or the actual item, the green item, and then its reflection down below. So the water line, much higher than you would think. Just saw a bird dive into it. We'll see quite a bit more of that here coming. Again, we're zoomed in, and you can see that bird take off from the water line and dive right back into the water. You can see that the water is several levels above what we would think. We think that hard line right there is the end of the water. But the water continues, and that boat is continuing out far away from us, way at the edge of that water. Keep an eye on this water line. You'll see in a second some birds take off here. There it goes, and you can see right there, I'll pause it, the reflection off the water. of the bird as it takes off. That's the water line, which means that's where the boat is. Which means everything below that is simply a reflection on the water. Hope this is making sense to you. It's certainly the truth. It certainly is exactly what's going on. It's just been something that's hard for us to decipher and figure out, but now that we know that that's what's happening, this water is just continuing.
Okay, so again, that was a very well done, perfectly explained demonstration of exactly the point that I was describing in terms of atmospheric refraction near the surface of the water at a distance, which causes an optical illusion. Now, the second big part of this is, of course, perspective, and the easiest way for me to describe this, although I did, and I'll throw up the diagram again, give an explanation that summarizes this. It sort of has to be explained in a series of steps in order to really fully understand the concept of perspective and how, again, as I mentioned before, the typical conventional art class 101 explanation of perspective, where all parallel lines meet at a single point, which is called the vanishing point. That's somewhat true to a degree, but it's not 100% true. Parallel lines that are near your line of sight, either vertically or horizontally, but if a parallel line diverges or is askewed from your line of sight, then the vanishing point will actually be different. It will converge further along the same datum line at the vanishing point. So again, it's hard to describe, but Dr. Robotham did a series of observations and experiments to prove this and show this and explain this in such a way that it's very understandably true. And again, it's just, you could call it, it's the way that nature operates, or you could call it the way that a convex lens operates, which our eyes are indeed convex lenses. And so it's just a natural phenomenon of how parallel lines work. And I'll just go ahead and roll this clip from Zetetic Astronomy 1865, and I'll put a link in the description for the full playlist for the full audiobook. Let the observer stand at the point A, looking in the direction of the arrows, and the rails 1, 2, 3, 4 will appear to join at the point B. But the rail 5, 6 will appear to have converged only as far as C towards B. Again, let a train be watched from the point A on figure 13. The observer looking from A with his eye midway between the bottom of the carriage and the rail will see the diameter of the wheels gradually diminish as they recede. The lines 1, 2, and 1, 4 will appear to approach each other until at the point B they will come together, and the space, including the wheels between the bottom of the carriage and the rail, will there disappear. The floor of the carriage will seem to be sliding without wheels upon the rail 1, 2, but the lines 5, 6, and 7, 8 will yet have converged only to C and D. The same phenomenon may be observed with the long row of lamps, where the ground is a straight line throughout its entire length, as represented in figure 14. Figures 14 and 15, the lines 1, 2, and AD will converge at the point D, and the pedestal of the lamp at D will seem to have disappeared, but the line 3, 4, which represents the true altitude of the lamps, will only have converged to the point C. A narrow bank running along the side of a straight portion of railway, upon which poles are placed for supporting the wires of the electric telegraph, will produce the same appearance as shown in figure 15. The bank having the altitude 1.13 and 1.24 will, in the distance of 2 or 3 miles according to its depth, disappear to the eye of an observer placed at figure 1, and the telegraph pole at figure 2 will seem not to stand upon a bank at all, but upon the actual railway. The line 3, 4 will merge into the line 1, 2 at the point B, while the line 5, 6 will only have descended to the position C. Many other familiar instances could be given to show the true law of perspective, which is that parallel lines appear in the distance to converge to one and the same datum line, but to reach it at different distances if themselves dissimilarly distant. This law being remembered, it's easy to understand how the hull of an outward bound ship, although sailing upon a plane surface, disappears before the masthead. On figure 16, let AB represent the surface of the water, CH the line of sight, and ED the altitude of the masthead. Then, as AB and CH are nearer to each other than AB and ED, they will converge and appear to meet at the point. That's figure 16. H, which is the practical, or as it would be better to call the optical horizon, the hull of the vessel being contained within the lines of AB and CH, must gradually diminish as these converge until at H, or the horizon, it enters the vanishing point and disappears. But the masthead represented by the line ED is still above the horizon at H, and will require to sail more or less according to its altitude beyond the point H before it sinks into the line CH, or in other words, before the lines AB and ED form the same angles as AB and CH. It will be evident that should the elevation of the observer be greater than C, the horizon or vanishing point would not be formed at H, but at a greater distance, and therefore the hull of the vessel would be longer visible. Or, if when the hull has disappeared at H, the observer ascends from the elevation at C to a higher position nearer to E, it will again be seen. Thus, all the phenomena which have so long been considered as proofs of the Earth's rotundity are really optical sequences of the contrary doctrine. To argue that because the lower part of an outward bound ship disappears before the highest, the water must be round, is to assume that a round surface only can produce this effect. But it is now shown that a plane surface necessarily produces this effect, and therefore the assumption is not required, and the argument involved is fallacious. It may here be observed that no help can be given to this doctrine of rotundity by quoting the prevailing theory of perspective. The law represented in the foregoing diagrams is the law of nature. It may be seen in every layer of a long wall, in every hedge and bank of the roadside, and indeed in every direction where lines and objects run parallel to each other. But no illustration of the contrary perspective is ever to be seen, except in the distorted pictures, otherwise cleverly and beautifully drawn as they are, which abound in our public and private collections. The theory which affirms that parallel lines converge only to one and the same point upon the eye line is an error. It is true only of lines equidistant from the eye line. It is true that parallel lines converge to one and the same eye line, but meet it at different distances when more or less apart from one another. This is the true law of perspective as shown by nature herself. Any other idea is fallacious and will deceive whoever may hold and apply it to practice. As it is of great importance that the difference should be clearly understood, the following diagram is given. Let EL in figure 17 represent the eye line and C the vanishing point of the lines 1C, 2C, and the lines 3, 4, 5, 6, although converging somewhere to the line EL will not do so to the point C, but 3, 4 will proceed to D and 5 and 6 to H. It is repeated that lines equidistant from the datum will converge on the same point and at the same distance, but lines not equidistant will converge on the same datum but at different distances. A very good illustration of the difference is given in figure 18. Theoretic perspective would bring the lines 1, 2, and 3 to the same datum line, EL, and to the same point, A. But the true or natural law would bring the lines 2 and 3 to the point A, because equidistant from the eye line EL, but the line 1 being further from EL than either 2 or 3, would be taken beyond the point A on towards C until it formed the same angle upon the line EL as 2 and 3 form at the point A. The subject of perspective will not be rendered sufficiently clear unless an explanation be given of the cause and character of what is technically called the, quote, vanishing point. Why do objects, even when raised above the earth, vanish at a great distance? It is known and can only be easily proved by experiment that the, quote, range of the eye or diameter of the field of vision is 110 degrees. Consequently, this is the largest angle under which an object can be seen. The range of vision is from 110 degrees to 1 degree. The smallest angle under which an object can be seen is upon an average for different sites, the 60th part of a degree, or 1 minute in space, so that when an object is removed from the eye 3,000 times its own diameter, it will only just be distinguishable. Consequently, the greatest distance at which we can behold an object like a shilling of an inch in diameter is 3,000 inches or 250 feet. It has been shown in section 1, pages 25 to 34, that the law of perspective, as commonly taught in our schools of art, is fallacious and contrary to everything seen in nature. If an object be held up in the air and gradually carried away from an observer who maintains his position, it is true that all its parts will converge to one and the same point. But if the same object be placed upon the ground and similarly moved away from a fixed observer, the same predicate is false. In the first case, the center of an object is the datum to which every point of the exterior converges. But in the second case, the ground becomes the datum, in and towards which every part of the object converges in succession, beginning with the lowest or that nearest to it. Instances: a man with light trousers and black boots walking along a level path will appear at a certain distance as though the boots had been removed and the trousers brought in contact with the ground. A young girl with short garments terminating 10 or 12 inches above the feet will, in walking forward, appear to sink towards the earth, the space between which and the bottom of the clothes will appear to gradually diminish. And in the distance of half a mile, the limbs, which were first seen for 10 or 12 inches, will be invisible. The bottom of the garment will seem to touch the ground. A small dog running along will appear to gradually shorten by the legs, which in less than half a mile will be invisible, and the body appear to glide upon the earth. Horses and cattle moving away from a given point will seem to have lost their hooves and to be walking upon the outer bones of the limbs. Carriages similarly receding will seem to lose that portion of the rim of the wheels which touches the earth. The axles will seem to get lower, and at the distance of a few miles, the body will appear to drag along in contact with the ground. This is very remarkable in the case of a railway carriage when moving away upon a straight and level portion of line several miles in length. These instances, which are but a few of what might be quoted, will be sufficient to prove beyond the power of doubt or the necessity of controversy that upon a plane or a horizontal surface, the lowest part of bodies receding from a given point of observation will disappear before the higher. This is precisely what is observed in the case of a ship at sea, when outward bound, the lowest part, the hull, disappearing before the higher parts, the sails and masthead. Abstractedly, when the lowest part of a receding object thus appears by entering the vanishing point, it could be seen again to any and every extent by a telescope, if the power were sufficient to magnify at the distance observed. This is to a great extent practicable upon smooth horizontal surface as upon frozen lakes or canals, and upon long straight lines of railway. But the power of restoring such objects is greatly modified and diminished, where the surface is undulating or otherwise movable, as in large and level meadows and pasture lands generally, in the vast prairies and grassy plains of America, and especially so upon the ocean, where the surface is always more or less an undulating condition. In Holland and other level countries, persons have seen in winter skating upon the ice at distances varying from 10 to 20 miles. On some of the straight and, quote, level lines, end quote, of railway which cross the prairies of America, the trains have been observed for more than 20 miles. But upon the sea, the conditions are altered, and the hull of a receding vessel can only be seen for a few miles, and this will depend very greatly, the altitude of the observer being the same, upon the state of the water. When the surface is calm, the hull may be seen much farther than when it is rough and stormy. But under ordinary circumstances, when to the naked eye the hull has just become invisible, or is doubtfully visible, it may be seen again distinctly by the aid of a powerful telescope. Although abstractedly or mathematically there should be no limit to this power of restoring by a telescope a lost object upon a smooth horizontal surface, upon the sea this limit is soon observed. The water being variable in its degree of agitation, the limit of sight over its surface is equally variable, as shown by the following experiments. In May 1864, on several occasions when the water was unusually calm, from the landing stairs of Victoria Pier at Portsmouth, and from an elevation of 2 feet 8 inches above the water, the greater part of the whole of the Nab lightship was, through a good telescope, distinctly visible. But on other experiments being made, when the water was less calm, no portion of it could be seen from the same elevation, notwithstanding that the most powerful telescopes were employed. At other times, half the hull and sometimes only the upper part of the bulwarks were visible. If the hull had been invisible from the rotundity of the earth, the following calculation will show that it should at all times have been 24 feet below the horizon. The distance of the lightship from the pier is 8 statute miles. The elevation of the observer being 32 inches above the water would require 2 miles to be deducted as the distance of the supposed convex horizon. For the square of 2 multiplied by 8 inches, the fall in the first mile of the Earth's curvation equals 32 inches. This is deducted from the 8 miles, will leave 6 miles as the distance from the horizon to the ship. Hence, 6 squared times 8 inches equals 288 inches or 24 feet. The top of the bulwarks, it was said, rose about 10 feet above the waterline, hence deducting 10 from 24 feet, under all circumstances, even had the water been perfectly smooth and stationary, the top of the hull should have been 14 feet below the summit of the arc of water, or beneath the line of sight. This one fact is entirely fatal to the doctrine of the Earth's rotundity, but such facts have been observed in various other places. The Northwest Lightship in Liverpool Bay, and the light vessels of many other channels near the southern, eastern, and western shores of Great Britain. From the beach of Southsea Common near Portsmouth, the observer lying down near the water above the surface of which the eye was 2.5 feet, and with the telescope looking across Spithead to the quarantine ship lying in the Roads, between Ryde and Cowes, in the Isle of Wight, a distance of 7 miles. The copper sheathing of that vessel was distinctly seen, the depth of which was about 2 feet. Making the usual calculation in accordance with the doctrine of the Earth's convexity, it will be seen that an arc of water ought to have existed between the 2 points, the summit of which arc should have been 16 feet above the copper sheathing of the vessel. From an elevation of 2.5 feet above the water, opposite the Royal Yacht Clubhouse in West Cowes, Isle of Wight, the pilework and promenade of the pier at Stokes Bay near Gosport, and nearly opposite Osborne House were easily distinguished through various telescopes, at the distances 7 miles, the altitude of the promenade 10 feet, and the usual calculation will show that this pier ought to have been many feet below the horizon. It is a well-known fact that the light of the Eddystone Lighthouse is often plainly visible from the beach in Plymouth Sound, and sometimes when the sea is very calm, persons can see it distinctly when sitting in ordinary rowing boats. in that part of the sound which will allow the line of sight to pass between Drake's Island and the western end of the breakwater. The distance is 14 statute miles. In a list of lighthouses in a work called The Lighthouses of the World by A.G. Findlay, FRGS, published in 1862 by Richard H. Lowry, 53, Flat Street, London, it said at page 28, quote, "In the tables, the height of the flame above the highest tide high water level is given, so that it is the minimum range of the light. To this elevation 10 feet is added for the height of the deck of the ship above the sea. Besides the increased distance to which low water will cause the light to be seen, the effect of refraction will also sometimes increase their range." Right, so I realized that was a rather lengthy detour into a total and 100% debunking of the claim made by, Christopher Columbus regarding the ships going over the curve of the Earth as a proof of a spherical Earth. I think we can pretty much lay that one to rest as an observation that is not exclusive to a sphere, and in fact, the natural laws of perspective, along with atmospheric refraction, will cause the exact same phenomenon to occur upon a plane. And so, without further ado, we'll just get right back into your original video.
If you live near a large body of water, you can easily see this for yourself with binoculars or a telescope. But here is a video you can watch of a cruise liner going over the horizon. See the link in the description for the full video. This only works on a curved Earth. The view of the ship is obviously going behind the curve, and you can always calculate exactly how far away this will happen, depending on how high you are up from the water. The higher up, the farther away the horizon. Flat Earthers try to explain this phenomenon away in a few ways. Some claim that the ships aren't actually hidden by the curve, they are just at the limits of our ability to see them, and if you zoom in, they come back into full view. But whenever they try to demonstrate this, they use a boat that is near the horizon, but not beyond it, like this one. Notice, he did not show a boat that was hidden at the bottom. This is just a blatantly wrong example to use. I don't know how they think this explains anything.
Okay, I'll just go on record right quick and show that I have been using several different clips of ships that have apparently merged with the horizon or vanished beyond the so-called curve, and they are indeed restored with a high zoom capability looking device, whether it's a telescope, binoculars, or even a really good digital zoom camera. This is what happens every single time, and of course, you'll have atmospheric conditions. So, like for example, if it's a foggy day, obviously this thing isn't going to work as well as if it's a clearer day. But of course, the limited vision to our eyes is dependent heavily on the atmosphere, especially closer to the ground where the atmosphere is at its most dense. And we can indeed restore objects that should technically be over the curve of the Earth, whether it's a ship or whether it's a 500 foot tall building that's visible 57 miles away, when it technically should be about a quarter mile below the horizon. So it really doesn't add up to a sphere, and the examples that you've used have been poor examples, indeed forgeries, which I think I pointed out already, and just very cut up, poorly done forgeries. Anyone that does these sort of tests objectively without using trick photography and lowering the camera to get results conducive to your model will come away with data that is incompatible with an inverse square sphere, a curve.
The examples they use are always not beyond the horizon, but near it, or right at it. To show the effect, you have to show a boat partially obscured by the horizon, like this, not this. Some will show a boat in choppy seas and claim that the swells are causing the obscuring of the bottom of the boat. But again, that's a bad example to use. Do you think there are swells big enough to hide half of this cruise ship? Also, you will need a clear day and one without extreme cold. Cold air near the water can create a number of different mirage effects because the temperature differences actually bends the light. But you can usually tell when this is happening, and it only happens in certain conditions.
I'm honestly with you so far, but I fail to see how any of this proves sphericity of the Earth. I mean, it seems to me that you're just sort of defending this bizarre, claim of Christopher Columbus that ships go over a curve, yet again, you fail to show sufficient evidence for it.
Also, the sun and moon rising and setting beyond the horizon perfectly shows that the Earth is curved, and they are much easier to see than distant boats. They both emerge from or slide behind the horizon exactly as we expect on a globe, and not at all what we would see on a flat Earth.
I think you're failing to realize that the sun and the moon are much closer in the flat Earth model, and necessarily closer due to triangulation based on plane trigonometry as opposed to spherical trigonometry. Now, I don't necessarily adhere to the 3,900 mile distance to the sun because whether it's a sphere or whether it's a plane, what we see as the sun is merely the apparent sun, which is sort of an illusion based on the light from the sun passing through our atmosphere, different layers of varying density and varying temperature, plane or atmosphere, which causes the visual angular size as well as direction and azimuth of the sun to be a subjective phenomenon, and variables such as atmospheric refraction as well as things a little bit more complex such as magnetic birefringence can cause the light from celestial objects like the sun and the moon to behave differently than you would think. Now, perspective does sort of solve the issue with sunset. However, there's another layer that we need to consider, or possibly multiple layers that we need to consider beyond the simple laws of perspective. Now, the sun and the moon are obviously on a far distant plane. It's not like we're talking about a ceiling a few feet above us. We're talking about, several thousand miles above us. So the vanishing point for an object that far askewed from our line of sight would be far beyond our little 3.5 mile, apparent horizon standing 6 feet tall. Now, the other element that you have to add into this is the atmosphere itself, which again renders the visible sky as a subjective phenomenon for any observer. So any observer standing, in a clear area or out at sea is going to have essentially a bubble, or a half a bubble, a hemisphere of atmosphere, or a hemisphere of atmosphere surrounding them above and around them in all directions. And this atmosphere becomes thicker and thicker proportionally with distance. And so what you have is this sort of bubble of reality that I guess you could say skews or distorts our vision of the incoming lights from the sun, the moon, and even the stars. And so we can't necessarily go by just our eyesight to determine where the sun is. Now, even globe Earth proponents submit that the sun sets several minutes prior, physically sets behind the horizon several minutes prior to us viewing it setting due to the condition of atmospheric refraction. However, this same sort of law works even better on a plane when you're considering again the idea of an apparent sun being subjective to any observer due to this bubble or hemisphere of atmosphere or gases surrounding us that become exponentially thicker as distance is gained. Okay, now magnetic birefringence is something that gets a little bit more complicated and is going to be harder to test and experiment with in a controlled sort of condition, but we have to at least acknowledge that it exists. The world itself is certainly known and is admitted by all scientists that the Earth itself holds a magnetic charge. So if it has a magnetic charge, there must be some sort of an electromagnetic relationship going on. Now, you globe earthers believe that molten lava in the core of the Earth, which is only hypothetical, it's never been proven, but this molten lava is somehow generating a magnetic field, and you cannot demonstrate in reality generating a magnetic field with a liquid state metal. Metals must be in a solid state in order to be magnetized. So this whole thing sort of doesn't make sense in a heliocentric model. But lo and behold, we do have a magnetic field surrounding the Earth. In the flat Earth model, it's more of a magnetic or an electromagnetic vortex in the center of the map, which is apparently or allegedly at the North Pole. And this electromagnetic vortex would be spinning in an opposite direction as the South Pole. Now, what we're talking about is not a globe magnet, which doesn't exist in reality, but instead a sort of a plate magnet, which does exist in reality. In fact, you'll find them in any sort of speaker. So a plate magnet has the North Pole in the center, and the South Pole is every point along the outside edge. Now, I do want to clarify that I'm not claiming the Earth is a disk in space. However, there is a magnetic field that appears to be emanating from the north and extending meridionally south. With all of this in mind, with the atmosphere and known elements of the Faraday effect, such as magnetic birefringence, we can't really go by just our eyes to sort of try and understand what the sun is doing and where the sun is at. Now, a much better vantage point to study the sun would be from 100,000 feet in the air from a weather balloon, where unless it's really close to high noon, the sun and the moon always appear to be just a few degrees above the horizon, which is very fishy in the globe Earth model, but makes a lot of sense in the flat Earth model. And it's really, if you think about it, it's very astonishing at how much light is bent and distorted omnidirectionally. So it's not just doing this in one direction, but light is doing this in all directions. And so it is a subjective experience. Looking at the sun is a subjective experience to each observer, depending on where they're standing. So, if I'm on the East Coast looking at the sun and somebody's on the West Coast looking at the sun, we're looking essentially at two different renderings of the same source light, but the source light is invisible or hidden from both of us. And so we need to sort of get out of this atmosphere or away from it as much as possible to avoid the disturbances and distortions and refraction, reflection, and refringence of light. And so I think that it's really, really important to get and study. I urge everyone to study high altitude weather balloon footage and try to find the ones that don't use a fisheye lens to create the illusion of curvature.
Flat Earthers claim that the sun and moon circle above the flat Earth, and the rising and setting is due to them coming in and out of view due to perspective. As explained, and I use the term loosely, in this clip from Flat Earther P. Brain.
Really quickly, before you get into that clip, I would mention that the atmosphere is totally left out of that animation that you're showing. It's almost as if the light in these sort of animations is behaving as if it's in a vacuum, when in fact we know that the light, say coming from the sun, which isn't even in the visible spectrum until it reaches our atmosphere, sort of spreads out, again, omnidirectionally. It lights the sky up in all directions like a blue sapphire, and it indeed renders the sky as opaque at a specific distance. Furthermore, due to the true behavior of atmospheric refraction, the sunlight is dampened in terms of the distance that it can travel, because the atmosphere sort of wants to drag it down towards the ground with it. So you've got a lot of variables at play, including the temperature, density, etc. of the atmosphere. That's why we can't see the stars during the daytime, and that's why at a certain distance, even very tall buildings will become impossible to see, because what you're looking at is blue sky reflecting back at you. And again, this is just the behavior of the atmosphere due to the elements that are in the atmosphere and sunlight. Now, of course, even during the nighttime, you still have this same phenomenon, but it's a little bit different. Anyway, getting right back to it.
Okay, here's a little illustrator or a little cartoon from a website called timeanddate.com. It's really funny that they would have a perfect illustration of a sun rising and setting on a flat Earth due to perspective. You'll notice that it rises from below the horizon and sets below the horizon. Now you might be saying, well, how's that possible? I can see now you're saying that it rises and lowers due to perspective, but how does it disappear below the horizon? Well, I got a theory about that. Because of the fact that all parallel lines and planes converge at your eye level horizon, this is according to the perspective, I'm not making this up. If in fact, and they do, they converge at your eye level horizon visually, then it makes sense that after that point they diverge, meaning they then separate, so the sun would continue on a downward track. As you can see from my illustration here, the lines would go to your horizon, and then afterwards they would spread out and separate, kind of like a starburst.
Now, I agree with P-Brain to an extent here. Perspective has a lot to do with sunset, but again, a big factor in this is obviously the atmosphere itself, which again sort of renders us biased observers here on the ground, because we really don't have a true understanding of where the sun or the source light for the sun actually is. Our vision is skewed by the atmosphere as well as the magnetic fields emanating from the Earth itself. Now, again, I'm not dissing P-Brain. I think he's got a very good point. And the laws of perspective have a lot to do with sunrise and sunset, as well as moonrise and moonset, and of course the stars behaving in such a way that they do. But again, I think that this is only a portion of the argument. We need to really focus on the atmosphere for one, and then once we've got that nailed down, which I think Dr. Zach has a pretty good model going with that, we need to study different ways that magnetic fields would affect the visible spectrum light that we observe and assume to be where the sun is, when in fact we're only looking at a subjective rendering of the sun itself.
Two huge problems here. One is that he shows a sun in the animation that always stays the same size, which indeed is what we see in reality. But if it were disappearing due to perspective, it would be getting bigger as it rises and smaller as it sets. But in his animation, it does not. The edges of the circle of the sun would get farther apart and closer together, just as all the sight lines he drew in do. Why would everything get smaller as it moves away except the sun or moon? That's absurd.
The reason this may seem absurd to you is because you don't fully understand it. First of all, a 35-mile diameter object, which is what the angular size of the sun appears to be, assuming a flat Earth and assuming that it's about 3,500 to 4,000 miles up at high noon, for example. Now, when it's traveled away from you, the vanishing point for the sun, again, would technically be far distant on the plane that it's upon, because it's so far above us, even thousands of miles above us. So the sun is not going to diminish in angular size by very much by the time it is obscured by your little 3.5 mile distant horizon. Okay, so it's not like the sun is going 3.5 miles away and vanishing. The sun is going hundreds and hundreds of miles away and vanishing, not because its angular size is getting so small to see, but because the horizon line itself is obscuring the sun. Now, again, we have to take into account atmospheric refraction, which is going to bend the light from the sun out and away from it and then down towards the ground as it passes through the different layers of density and temperature atmosphere. So sunset is certainly not exclusive to a spinning sphere Earth. And by the way, I can show you videos of sunrises and sunsets where the sun indeed appears to get smaller and smaller and smaller as it sets. And I can conversely show you sunrises or sunsets where the sun appears to stay exactly the same size throughout the sunrise or sunset period. And this has a lot to do with the atmosphere. If it's a very cold, chilly day, it's going, with very little haze or fog, you're out of the city, you're going to experience a far different sunset compared to one where you're in sort of a, high density atmosphere, foggy, smoggy area. There are variables involved here, but the simple fact is that sunrise and sunset are not exclusive proof of a spinning sphere Earth. And if you actually try to model this out and apply the laws of perspective, apply the laws of atmospheric refraction, atmospheric lensing to this, you'll find that sunrise and sunset are very well explained on the flat Earth. One of the very most important things to remember in terms of the sunrise and sunset is, again, how distant the sun is. When it apparently converges with your horizon, again, is only about 3.5 miles away. But the sun has traveled hundreds of miles, which is, not going to diminish its angular size very much if it's, the given proportions in the flat Earth model. And even still, you've got atmospheric lensing, which when the sun is setting, when it's apparently nearest to the horizon, the light from it is traveling across the densest layer of atmosphere, which is closest to the ground, which certainly very well explains the sun remaining the same angular size as it sets, or rises. The atmosphere behaves as sort of a magnifying glass or a lens. So really, I just hope that you're able to think this through. Sunrise and sunset are not exclusive to a spherical Earth.
Here is what we actually see. The sun and moon slide behind the horizon and maintain their visual. That is not perspective. Perspective works both vertically and horizontally. Objects farther away appear smaller and closer together in both directions. The sun and moon were just circling over the flat Earth and getting too far away to see, then we would see them shrink and fade out of view as they set.
What I'm going to try to do is break down this diagram a little bit. It looks a bit complex, but it is to relay a point that needs to be understood. So we'll just sort of start from the top down. You've got what is, you can call the astral plane or the astronomical plane, but just assuming that all of the stars are essentially fixed to this same plane. In the basic sense, this is the plane where the astronomical bodies reside. And, you could assume that they're all more or less along the same plane. Now, moving down, these two stars here would appear beneath the horizon according to the subjective anecdotal observations from position A in the diagram, which is this here. So what you've got down here is the apparent 3.5 mile horizon of the observer standing here about 6 feet tall. What you'll notice is that the apparent ground horizon converges with the astral plane at a point intersecting with the ground horizon and the astral plane. Now, this doesn't mean that the astral plane is actually meeting with the ground or anything near that. It's just how the laws of perspective work. Now, we're not talking about a ceiling that's a few feet above you, we're talking about possibly thousands of miles above you. So the operation of perspective will still work in a sense that distant objects will drop lower and lower, proportionally with distance, when in fact they are on the same parallel plane. Now, this line here denotes any stars beyond this line, so again moving away from 90 degrees above this observer. Beyond this line, stars beyond that point would appear to drop below the horizon. However, this is of course an optical illusion and a natural operation of perspective coupled with atmospheric refraction. Yet again, objects that are above your line of sight will appear to drop lower and lower in direct proportion with lateral distance away from the observer. Now, a star that's 90 degrees above, there would be no apparent drop or vertical drop due to perspective. For stars directly overhead, perspective only applies to stars that are laterally distant from the observer, going off in this direction. Now, these two stars here would apparently be beneath the ground according to this observer. And you've got a little key here. The yellow stars here represent the actual position of the stars. The pink stars here represent the apparent position of visible stars. And the white stars here and here represent very distant stars that would apparently be beneath the subjective 3.5 mile horizon point here, or beyond the ground-based vanishing point. It's really quite simple. Now, the red dot here would be the observer, about 6 feet tall, with the ground horizon or vanishing point of about 3.5 miles. Now, this is where you believe the Earth is curving down vertically. However, it's a basic operation of perspective that causes these stars, which are more or less on the same plane, appear to drop lower and lower and eventually converge with the horizon. At a very great distance, far beyond the 3.5 mile mark, yet according to our convex lens eye, this point here and this point here are connected, one and the same. It's sort of hard to diagram that out, but hopefully this will make some sense to how perspective affects, celestial bodies in a sense of the diminishing in apparent altitude as distance is gained, but not so much. It wouldn't affect the angular size so much because we're talking about relatively large distant bodies, and this same sort of thing would apply to the sun, especially considering you have a bubble of atmosphere around this observer, which would cause light to sort of follow along with this bubble, and it all makes perfect sense.
If the sun and moon were just circling over the flat Earth and getting too far away to see, then we would see them shrink and fade out of view as they set. But we don't. Flat Earthers will show you videos where the sun appears to grow or shrink, but this is an illusion due to thick clouds. You can always see that there are clouds near the horizon when they try to show this. Normally, this illusion does not happen. The second way this so-called perspective matrix fails is even more ridiculous. The lines drawn in the illustration are lines of sight, and they correctly converge to the vanishing point, the point at which you can't see farther. But he claims that past the vanishing point, the lines diverge. What? What lines? It's a vanishing point. There are no lines of sight past a vanishing point. There is nothing to diverge. You can't have lines of sight past what you could see. And if it did work that way, we could see objects beyond the horizon and they would be upside down. Think about that. No, this is totally wrong.
Now, I'm not going to sit here and defend or apologize for P-Brain, but again, he does have a good point. It's just not the full picture. Perspective is only a small part of this. I might sound like a broken record by now, but again, you have to consider primarily the way that electromagnetic waves, which is what light waves are before they reach our atmosphere, how EM waves are affected by different media, such as several different layers of differing density and temperature atmosphere plane. as well as electromagnetic fields emanated by the Earth itself. So there's these two factors that need to be taken into account beyond simple perspective. Perspective is, of course, a big part of it, but again, the other big part of it is the subjective nature of how we view objects far distant in the day sky as well as the night sky due to the atmosphere. The point that he was trying to make, I don't think he was necessarily insinuating that the line of sight would diverge beyond the horizon, and the fact that you say that's ridiculous is true because you're misrepresenting his point. What he was saying is that, theoretically, if your line of sight converges with the horizon at a certain point, then not your line of sight, but an object going beyond that point would diverge from your line of sight. So that actually makes a lot of sense to me. However, I think that the vanishing point or the horizon is more subjective based on conditions, primarily atmosphere and elevation, being the two primary conditions which dictate how distant your apparent horizon is. So if it's a foggy day, even if you're pretty high up, your horizon is going to be damn near. If it's a very clear day and you're out in the desert or the salt flats where there's hardly any humidity, your horizon is going to be extremely distant. And in fact, people can see mountain ranges and even shorter structures at like over 100 miles away on the salt flats, which makes absolutely no sense on a spherical Earth, considering such an object should be, at 100 miles and say 90, just to give it a good cushion on the globe side. We'll do 90 squared times 0.666 to render the result in feet in expected curvature, which it should be 5,399 feet in expected curvature, almost a mile across a 100-mile stretch. Yet another example would be there are a number of people who are ex-Navy claiming and asserting that they've gotten line of sight laser guidance targeting systems on vessels that are over 100 nautical miles away. So again, this is all of this evidence, this direct line of sight evidence, especially over 100 miles, is clearly contrary to any notion that the Earth is a sphere. And again, not only is curvature a big problem that there's no physical evidence for, and in fact there's a good mountain of physical evidence showing the Earth to be a plane, but there is a similarly large empirical smorgasbord of evidence showing the Earth to be stationary, which you haven't even touched in this video. So anyways.
Another way to demonstrate the curve is with distant city skylines. A good example is the city of Toronto, viewed from across Lake Ontario. The city is dominated by the distinctive CN Tower, currently the third tallest tower in the world at 1,815 feet. There are many pictures online of the Toronto skyline, viewed from Niagara-on-the-Lake, New York, 30 miles away. With the MEGA-debunk calculation, we see that 486 feet of the tower, or about 26% of it, should be hidden behind the curve of the Earth from that distance. And this is exactly what we see, as you can easily tell when compared to an image of the full tower at the same scale.
Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and tear apart everything that you just said, starting from the very beginning. Now, I call big-time bullshit on your baseline here. You can see on the bottom left corner of this image, because you're obviously, that's sea level. That's not the base of the tower. That's you can literally see the water there. Then there's elevated dirt that comes up to a point, and then you have the base of the tower. So you added 5% to the overall tower that shouldn't be there, so you cheated right there. And I put the dotted red line to indicate where the actual base of the tower is. And so I'll just read this off, that the red line indicates the actual base of the tower. Your white mark indicates sea level and not the base of the tower at all. inconspicuously adding several percentage points to your irrelevant argument, as the laws of perspective upon a plane allow for tall buildings to disappear bottom first simply by obeying the laws of perspective according to our convex lens eyes, and scopes like telescopes or binoculars to increase visibility are also convex lenses. Now, at any rate, I will start my calculations at the dotted red line indicated here and not the sea level line indicated by your bullshit little white line. Now, moving on to the next slide, you can see I added 2 blue lines to indicate the height of each tower, and you did get the scale pretty darn close, so I won't argue with you on the scale. I will argue with you on the base, so I did up the base a bit. But the 2 blue lines adjacent to the 2 buildings, or the 2 images of the tower in question, are exactly 5.11 inches tall, meaning the 1,815 foot building is scaled down to 0.0028154269972452 inches represents 1 foot, meaning there are 355.2 feet represented per inch in this example. So 27% of the 5.11 inches, and I measured this all out in a video editing software where I called this the 0 inch, and indeed this is 5.11 inches. At any rate, 27% of the 5.11 inches equals 1.3797 inches. Now, the 1.3797 inch mark is precisely represented by the yellow line running horizontally across the image you see here. The expected amount of apparent vertical declination is double what you claim it to be, but there's actually more than just this. However, I would mention that you're either just really bad at this or you're being disingenuous all across the board, but we'll get into this a little bit more. Now, as we saw earlier in this presentation, there is an obvious mirage or mirroring effect going on about halfway between the water line and the yellow line, indicating, again, the yellow line indicating the actual 27% mark of the building, not the point where you have it marked off as being right in line with the water. Again, it's about double that, but you can clearly see that the skyline, the bottoms of the buildings are all inverted mirror image of the upper portion of the buildings. You can clearly see, if you scan the bottoms of the buildings, are all inverted mirror images of the upper portion of the buildings. And I'll go ahead and mark that mirror point in red now, just in case you missed it. But there's even more deception afoot here. Niagara-on-the-Lake, which is where this image is taken from, the elevation is 270 feet. That's the observation point. Toronto, which is the distant cityscape, it has an elevation of 249 feet. A difference of 21 feet plus at least an extra 6-foot observer, since the observer altitude was not documented in this so-called experiment. We can only assume that the observer was at least elevated, 6 feet above the 21-foot mark, or 27 feet above the level of Toronto, not 6 feet as you claimed and plugged into your ridiculous little calculator, which only works if a competent person uses it. Now, your sloppy attempt to calculate these things by half-assing your way around the lazy boy researcher tool without a clue as to what you're doing shows you don't understand the fundamental principles involved with testing the world for inverse square curvature. Technically, due to this major flaw in your execution of the simple spherical geometry, along with your grossly misleading images and figures addressed multiple times earlier, the horizon of the observer from Niagara-on-the-Lake would be far greater than a mere 3.5 miles, you must subtract that distance, whatever it may be, at least 27 feet higher than the level of Toronto, in order to begin the expected curvature calculations, where your line of sight would become a tangent to the true level, or the very elusive non-existing Earth curvature. So again, the term true level is applied to the expected Earth curvature, while the apparent level would be applied to your line of sight, which would become a tangent to that curve at a specific distance relative to your altitude. Now, at the correct distance based on altitude should be the first consideration, which you completely ignored and just assumed to be 6 feet. Ugh, I mean, really, your breakdown of this 30-mile distant building is juvenile at best and purposefully misleading at worst. You should retract your rather clumsy misuse of a tool which you must learn to fundamentally use, and you must learn the premises behind the calculations before trying to prove anything with a calculator that you don't understand how to use. Congrats on proving yourself to be scientifically illiterate and with simple geometry no less. Wow.
Flat earthers sometimes show cities in the distance that, according to them, should be below the horizon but are clearly visible, and claim this proves the flat earth.
It obviously proves it. You obviously don't understand that a sphere would necessarily display inverse square curvature in all directions, vertically dropping away from an observer at an exponential rate. A city viewed from across a body of water nearly 60 miles away shows the expected curvature does not exist.
This can be difficult to disprove because you never really know where the picture was taken from. They may have gotten the distance wrong, or the height of the observation wrong, or the calculation wrong. One example they use is the Chicago skyline seen from 60 miles away across Lake Michigan. At a viewing height of 6 feet, we calculate that 2,166 feet should be below the horizon at 60 miles. So they are right that the entire city of Chicago should be completely hidden. And it is hidden nearly all the time. But sometimes it can be seen from that far away, due to a type of atmospheric light refraction phenomenon called a superior mirage. A superior mirage is caused by colder air below warmer air, which bends the light around the curve of the Earth. This event sometimes makes the news for the very reason that it is a rare occurrence.
Until I found this photo, Grandmere State Park. This is from Joshua Nowicki, and what you're seeing here is a mirage. Typically, you would not be able to see this on the Lake Michigan shore. We talked about this last night. Conditions are right on the lake. We're actually seeing a mirage of the Chicago skyline.
You can tell that it's a mirage because there is lots of distortion. The Willis Tower on the left is clearly elongated.
The only thing elongated here is your nose because you are a liar. I superimposed the little building on the left that you've got placed way out in the water, much larger than the building in the background. You can see off to the very right of the tower I placed a to-scale image of the very same tower, and it seems perfect to me. In fact, it seems like you did a little bit of clone stamping to make it seem as if it was off base, but the damn thing lines up perfectly. So you're way off base here. Your Photoshop editing skills are not that great, and as you can see, the two side-by-side towers, mine is the one off to the right, are exactly proportional. So there is no elongation, and if there were an elongation, that would obviously be because the image that you superimposed way off in front in the water was larger than the image that you should have been making it to scale with, but it was also taken at an angle much closer, so you're looking up at the structure as opposed to 30 miles away where you're looking across the water at the structure where the tip top of it's almost at eye level. So you're going to get some different angles involved, but I noticed that you had forged your little image, made it much larger than it should have been, because it should have been to scale with the other one. And when I took away your little shenanigans, indeed all of the proportions with that tower line up just perfectly as shown in this diagram. Shame on you for either just lying or being really poor with Photoshop, much as you are with your little MEGA-debunk calculator and trigonometry and geometry and everything else we've mentioned so far. Honesty, that's another one I think you need work on.
And also, there are videos of this same view that show the buildings dancing around, changing shape, and even disappearing.
That's obviously because of the atmosphere interfering with your line of sight. That's why it's always best to take these sort of pictures, during the twilight hours when there's the least amount of atmospheric distortion messing up your shot. And of course, different densities and temperatures of atmosphere are going to cause things to appear larger in angular size or smaller in angular size, depending on factors. We're not arguing that light, doesn't bend due to refraction, but the point is that you're being disingenuous about this whole thing, and the mirages that you were showing were not sufficient to raise a 60-mile distant city quarter mile in the air without inverting the image and being all sorts of, we can tell when something's a mirage because it's wavy and it doesn't look real. No. The Chicago skyline from Grandmere State Park taken during twilight hours clearly proves that the Earth doesn't curve downward, exponentially as it should. So, you talk about cherry-picking arguments, man, you're the king of it.
Even though this is a mirage, the bottom parts of the buildings are clearly still obscured from view, just as we expect. If the Earth was flat, you could see the buildings on any clear day, not just rarely when the conditions are right for refraction.
Again, here you're just being totally disingenuous or totally ignorant. The reason that people can sometimes see Chicago from Grandmere State Park and sometimes they can't, yes, it has to do with the atmosphere, but it doesn't have to do with conditions, creating mirages. There's just certain times a day when the atmosphere is opaque, and certain times a day when the atmosphere is conducive to long-distance shots. It's very simple.
Flat earthers use these rare events to try to prove the Earth is flat, but that makes no sense. It's called cherry picking, a favorite trick of all types of science deniers.
You're such a liar. There's so many documented cases of buildings and lighthouses and objects that should be thousands of feet beneath the so-called curve of the Earth that are plainly visible, even with the naked eye, not even with, super optics. And yet you say that we're cherry picking, and you're claiming that mirages cause this, and it's just ridiculous that you can't see the plain, simple truth that's directly in front of your face. You've lived on a static plane your whole life, and yet you believe you live on a spinning sphere.
You don't get to pick the anomalies that seem to agree with your views and ignore the common observations that don't, and still call yourself an honest investigator. That is intellectually dishonest. As I have shown, the horizon is all we really need to know that we live on a sphere. But there are other observations you can make yourself that all perfectly fit the heliocentric globe model when you understand it, as I will explain in future videos. Thanks for watching.
Well, that was a vulgar display of ignorance, deception, misunderstanding, error, just a witch's brew of ignorance that I'm glad to be done debunking. Hopefully you enjoyed it. For those of you out there who would like to support my channel and support my efforts, you can do so through PayPal to johnelance@gmail.com or through fan funding on YouTube, although that is not preferred for a couple reasons. But if you don't like PayPal, you can support this channel through fan funding. This is obviously optional. My work is free for all to view and share and download and do whatever you want with it. However, if you feel that my efforts and my video and my work is worth something to you, then feel free to contribute whatever you feel that it's worth. And like I always say, if you wish you could contribute but you don't have the money, it's the thought that counts, so I appreciate that all the same. With that being said, God bless you all, spread the word, spread the world, and peace.